Welcome to Haunting Whispers. Tonight, as the rain falls softly, we'll share some true scary stories to help you relax and fall asleep. And comment where are you watching from and the time are watching this video. Ever wondered what happens when darkness falls and the rain starts? Stay with us to find out in tonight's chilling stories. Let the gentle rain and these chilling tales carry you off to sleep. Sweet dreams. If someone invites you to go to Corpsewood, do not go. We should have never gone down that old, unmarked country road. I knew it, deep down, as soon as Tyler's old Chevy skidded off the asphalt onto the gravel, the headlights slicing through the dense blackness of the Chattahoochee National Forest. The road was more of a narrow, forgotten trail, just a strip of dirt barely wide enough for the truck. Trees loomed in on both sides, their branches like twisted claws scratching at the truck's paint. Jenna clutched my arm from the passenger seat, face a tight mask of unease. "It'll be fun," Tyler said, his voice too loud in the oppressive silence, trying to shake off the nervous tension in the cab. "Just some harmless exploring." I could hear Melissa and Craig laughing nervously in the back seat. They were ready to turn this creepy night into some stupid Instagram adventure. But me? I just felt uneasy nerves, maybe. But the lizard part of my brain was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. After what felt like an eternity, Tyler killed the engine. The silence was instant and absolute, save for the gentle rustle of leaves in the cold night breeze. Dead Horse Road had led us to a small clearing, and beyond that, barely their trail winding deeper into the forest. Somewhere out there, 3 miles or so, lay Corpsewood Manor. We got out, flashlights flicking on, beams cutting through the fog that clung low to the ground. The night seemed thicker here, the dark more oppressive. Tyler led the way, like he always did. Craig and Melissa followed, stumbling over roots and rocks, laughing a little too loudly. Jenna squeezed my hand, her grip tight, as if she could feel it too, the way the air seemed to hum with something our brains couldn't or wouldn't identify. Tyler's voice cut through the heavy silence, almost eager to break the tension. "All right, so Corpsewood Manor. You all know the basics, right? Back in the 70s, this place was built by Dr. Charles Scudder and his partner, Joseph Odom. Scudder was a professor of pharmacology in Chicago, but he left all that behind to move out here, away from society." Jenna glanced up at me, already looking uneasy. I could feel her pulse quickening against my arm, but Tyler wasn't about to let up. "Thing is, Scudder wasn't just some eccentric professor," Tyler continued. "He had a serious interest in the occult, rumored to be into Satanism too. Built this place as a kind of retreat, or maybe a shrine. They say the manor was filled with books on alchemy, ritual magic, and all kinds of weird stuff. The dude even painted his own murals, demons, pentagrams, that sort of thing. And they weren't just for show. He believed in this stuff. Big time." Jenna shivered beside me, her grip tightening. "I heard they used to have parties out here," she said softly, more to herself than anyone. "Weird parties." Tyler nodded, leaning into the story. "Yeah, exactly. Scudder and Odom didn't exactly keep to themselves. They'd invite people over, friends, drifters, anyone really. They called it their pink room. No electricity, no running water, just candlelight and booze. Scudder made his own homemade LSD, so people would get high, talk philosophy, or whatever else they did. There were rumors of rituals, some weird sex stuff, and sacrifices, animal sacrifices mostly, but who knows, right?" Craig snorted. "So, like, typical hippie cult stuff?" Tyler's expression darkened. "Maybe, but it went deeper than that. Scudder called himself a follower of Thelema, which was this occult philosophy started by Aleister Crowley, the great beast. Scudder also kept a small altar in the manor with a skull, candles, and that statue of Mephistopheles, the same statue that went missing after the murders." Finally, after what felt like hours of trudging through the endless dark, the trees began to thin, and we saw it, crumbling silhouette against the moonlit sky. Corpsewood Manor, or what was left of it. The ruins stood like skeletal fingers clawing up from the earth, half swallowed by ivy and tangled in moss, their jagged edges sharp against the night. Broken brick walls leaned precariously, and shards of shattered glass glinted in our flashlight beams. A once stately place now left to rot and ruin. Jenna stopped, her breath catching in her throat. This is it?" Her voice was a strained whisper, as if speaking too loudly might awaken something lurking in the dark. Yeah, Tyler replied, his voice low and almost reverent. This is it. We crept forward, our steps slow and tentative. Every movement felt heavy, deliberate, like the earth itself resisted our intrusion. The air seemed thicker here, colder, each breath a shiver. The shadows felt alive, pressing in from all sides. We stepped over what remained of a crumbling threshold, crossing into the gutted remains of the manor. Inside, the ground was littered with broken bottles, remnants of past visitors who'd come seeking a thrill and left behind their trash. A rusted can crunched under my foot, and I flinched at the sound, too loud in the stillness. Look at this, Melissa whispered, pointing to a broken wine bottle with a faded, torn label. People really came out here to party? Tyler's flashlight swept across the ground, revealing more. Old cigarette butts, scraps of cloth, a discarded lighter. Yeah, he muttered, particularly fucked up considering Joseph Odom's ashes were spread here. His light paused over a dark stain on the brick floor, something that might have been oil or something else. Melissa stopped in her tracks and spun on her heel, her face pale and strained in the dim light. What the hell, Tyler? You didn't think to mention that before we came out here? That his ashes were spread here? Her voice rose, frantic and edged with anger. Are you kidding me? This isn't some haunted house attraction. This is a real place where people died, where their bodies were literally scattered. Melissa, calm down, Tyler said, his tone steady. Plenty of people have come here and left without anything happening. It's just a story, just a place. We'll be fine. Look around. People partied here, trashed the place, and went home with no problem. Nothing's gonna happen to us. Melissa's eyes narrowed to slits, her rage barely contained as she practically strangled Tyler with her gaze. Tension between them crackled in the cold air. Tyler, unfazed, continued his unsettling lecture about Corpsewood Manor. Back in the early 80s, people around here started getting nervous. Tyler began, his voice dropping to a whisper as he continued. Rumors spread that Scudder, the owner, was a Satanist, and in December 1982, things went straight to hell. Two guys, Tony West and Avery Brock, who'd been out to the manor a few times, decided to rob the place. They were drunk, high, whatever. Things went south fast. They shot both Scudder and Odom, killed their dogs, Beelzebub and Arsenath, all while Scudder's collection of human skulls stared them in the face. A moment of silence followed, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves. Jenna turned to Tyler with a puzzled frown. Wait, you said Avery Brock? You have the same last name as one of the murderers? That's creepy. Tyler's lips curled into a smirk. Even better, he's my uncle. Jenna's eyes widened and a chill ran down my spine. That's pretty fucked up, man, I said, trying to hide my unease. Jenna nodded, face pale. Yeah, why would you be proud of something so horrible? Melissa's eyes flashed with anger. You goddamned asshole. You brought us to the place where your uncle murdered people. Her voice rose sharply, cutting through the night. This isn't some casual adventure. It's so fucked up that you drag us here knowing the history. Tyler's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. It's just history. Not my fault what my uncle did. Melissa's face twisted. You've been boasting about your own shitty family history like it's something to be proud of. That's messed up. You're fucking sick. Tyler's expression darkened, his tone growing colder. Yeah? Well, at least I'm not known around here for being a raging slut. Before he could finish, Craig stepped forward, his face set in a protective glare. I will fucking end you, boy. Back up off my sister. Tyler's hostility flared, and the argument grew more heated. Sensing the danger, I stepped in quickly, trying to defuse the situation. Look, this isn't helping anyone. Let's just leave before things get any worse. This is seriously messed up. You should have told us about this before dragging us into a fucked up field trip. Tyler's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken fears and the weight of the night's revelations as we gathered ourselves and prepared to leave. The wind shifted, growing colder and whispering through the brick ruins like a sinister hiss. Tyler's face grew momentarily serious. You ever hear of Faust? He asked. But before Tyler could continue, Craig and I exchanged uneasy glances. Tyler, just stop, I said, trying to cut him off. You're really pushing it, mother foo. Craig started, his voice edged with increasing frustration before Melissa silenced him with a firm look. Tyler ignored us, his tone growing more intense. Scudder was obsessed with Faust. The legend says he sold his soul to the devil for knowledge. Who knows what kind of deals Scudder might have made out here in these woods? Tyler, seriously, stop talking, I urged again, but his words persisted, carrying an unsettling weight through the dark forest. Jenna moved closer to me, her fingers brushing mine. Why does it feel like we're being watched? I didn't have an answer. The whole place felt wrong, like the ruins were breathing, watching, waiting. The silence was so complete, it felt like a living, palpable thing pressing against my skin. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of the atmosphere, the darkness more solid than air. We continued to explore, pushing deeper into the ruins, our flashlight beams slicing through the murk. Broken, rotting wooden staircase loomed to our right, leading to a second floor that had long since collapsed. We found what remained of the pink room, now just a shell of its former self, bare walls still bearing faint, faded murals of demons and sigils. Tyler moved ahead, pushing through a tangle of ivy, when Jenna stopped suddenly. "Did you hear that?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. I listened, straining against the silence. Faint noise, just on the edge of hearing. A low, rumbling growl like distant thunder, but it came from the shadows. Close, too close. Then another growl, answering from the opposite direction, deeper, more menacing. The sound vibrated through the floor, through my bones. Jenna's grip on my arm tightened painfully. What was that? Her voice trembled, panic creeping in. I swung my flashlight toward the sound. For a moment I saw nothing but shadows. Then they emerged, slowly, from opposite sides of the clearing. Two shapes, massive and dark, moving through the gloom with a predatory grace. They were more shadow than flesh, their forms barely visible in the dim light. Their eyes, though, those were unmistakable. They glowed like hot coals, a dull, reddish light burning in the depths of the night. Beelzebub and Arsena, Scudder's dogs, the guardians of Corpsewood, still patrolling their territory, even in death. "Run!" Tyler's shout was almost drowned out by the sudden, explosive barking, a sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath us. Craig panicked, turning to sprint, but he took 2 frantic steps before his foot slipped on a patch of moss. He tumbled backward down a small, steep embankment, disappearing into what had once been a pond, now a dry, rocky basin filled with detritus. His body landed with a sickening crunch, the sound of bone against stone echoing in the night. I heard his scream, sharp and shrill, reverberating through the ruins. The dogs moved like shadows given form, silent and impossibly fast. One bounded down the slope with terrifying agility, landing with a heavy thud. Craig tried to scramble away, but his leg was twisted beneath him, his movements frantic, desperate. His hands clawed at the earth, fingers scraping against something cold and hard. Broken remains of a pink stone gargoyle, half buried in the mud. He was pinned, helpless. Mastiffs pounced, their massive jaws closing around him. Craig's screams filled the night, a sound that turned my blood to ice. I felt Jenna's fingers digging into my arm, her breath quick and shallow, on the verge of hyperventilation. I grabbed her, pulling her away, toward the remnants of what must have been a parlor, when I saw him, Charles Scudder, or the thing that had once been him. He stepped out of the shadows, his face a ruin of flesh, eyes milky and unseeing, yet somehow fixed on us with an unnatural rage. His clothes hung in tatters, filthy with dirt and mold. In his mummified hand, clutched something, a tarnished, heavy statue, glinting dully in the moonlight. The missing statue of Mephistopheles. Tyler stood frozen, his eyes locked onto the corpse of Scudder, a mixture of fear and acceptance flickering across his face. Dead figure raised the statue high, grotesque reminder of Avery Brock's sins. As Scudder's dead eyes bore into him, Tyler sank slowly to his knees, his expression a haunting blend of resignation and dread. The statue, gripped with unnatural strength, hovered above him, casting a long shadow as if preparing to deliver the ultimate retribution for the sins of his uncle. The forest held its breath, the weight of inevitability pressing down on Tyler as he awaited his grim fate. The crack echoed through the woods before I even saw it, Tyler's skull splitting open under the crushing weight. Blood erupted, dark and glistening, spraying across the ruined walls and dripping in dark rivulets. Scudder didn't stop. His hands, wet with blood, rose and fell with mechanical precision, the statue smashing down again and again. Tyler's body twitched and jerked with each brutal impact, his flesh tearing, bones shattering under the relentless assault. Wet, sickening thuds filled the air, punctuated by the crunch of splintering bone and the soft, gurgling sounds from what remained of Tyler's ruined head. Corpse kept beating as if driven by a fury that death couldn't quell. Melissa's scream cut through the night, a sharp, keening wail that sent a shiver down my spine. She turned to flee. The forest had already closed in, the trail swallowed by an impenetrable darkness. We were trapped, air thick with a palpable, sinister energy. The shadows around us began to stir, creeping closer with an unsettling purpose. Suddenly, the foliage sprang to life. Vines lashed out like serpents, wrapping around Melissa's ankles and yanking her off her feet. She clawed desperately at the ground. The possessed plants were relentless, dragging her inch by inch toward the ruins of the old coop. Her screams grew frantic, then choked as the vines tightened around her throat, pulling her deeper into the darkness. Melissa's cries grew faint, lost in the dense, suffocating dark, and with a terrible finality, I knew we had lost her. Jenna's grip on my arm was like a vice, her face drained of color, her eyes wide with a terror that seemed to pierce through me. We turned and ran until our throats were raw and the muscles in our legs screamed for relief, until we burst out of the forest and straight to the truck. We escaped. Physically, Jenna didn't quite make it out. What she saw in those last moments fractured her mind. She stopped sleeping, her eyes darting around like she could still see the shadows moving, creeping ever closer. She'd mutter to herself in the dark, nonsense words mixed with prayers, her fingers scratching at her arms until they bled. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink, just sat rocking back and forth, whispering about vines crawling up her legs, about Melissa's face emerging from the shadows, about a voice that kept calling her name in a low, mournful wail. The doctors tried everything, but nothing could reach her. She shrieked if anyone touched her, her hands clawing at empty air like she was fighting something only she could see. It wasn't long before they sent her to a mental health facility, her mind shattered, broken by that night at Corpsewood. And now I sit here, my hands trembling, trying to make sense of it all, trying to put this nightmare into words. I don't know how much time I have left. Arsenoth and Beelzebub have been circling the house for 2 days, their black forms pacing just beyond the windows. I can feel their gaze through the walls, feel their presence thickening the air. They're waiting for me. But if you think that was unsettling, just wait. The next story delves even deeper into the unknown. I've started seeing the same person everywhere, and I think it's because I've been stealing dead people's memory. My name is Besser. I've always been a man of many faces, a master of disguise, and a thief with a complicated past. An ex once said my life teeters on the edge of legality, an intricate dance of survival and deceit, all wrapped around a heart of gold. Sounds about right. I have a knack for finding trouble, or maybe trouble has a knack for finding me sometime. Hard to say which came first, but on this particular night, as the rain hammered against the pavement, trouble came in the form of a cryptic text message. The words were simple: "We have one." I continued my journey into a dingy bodega, kind of place that attracts both lost souls and shady late-night characters. The owner, a wiry man, cast a suspicious glance in my direction as I entered. I was used to it. We exchanged a few vague words, and I left with a pack of cigarettes, my mind elsewhere. The rain intensified as I made my way to, of all places, the morgue. Inside the bright yellow front door, I found nobody. I sat, waited, almost finding solace in the silence of the deceased, until a man beckoned me through another door. In the back room, 2 strangers awaited me, their faces tinged with anticipation. The men said their names were Dr. Ramirez and Dr. Martin. Were those their real names? Probably not. In the middle of the room, a barber's chair caught my attention. Its many attached wires and devices a chaotic mess, or maybe a puzzle. The wires, leading behind a curtain, were arranged in a way that didn't exactly scream FDA approval. Ramirez noticed my curiosity about what was behind the curtain and offered, "Do you want to take a look?" Grimaced instantly. "Nope, no emotional attachments. I don't need to know anything about it." My attention drifted just long enough for me to mutter, 500, right? "Yeah," Martin replied. I pulled a dog-eared wad of cash from my coat pocket, counted it, and tossed it toward the two white coats. In the dimly lit room, I settled into the cold metal chair. The air had the sharp scent of formaldehyde, a chilling reminder of exactly where we were. Ramirez and Martin positioned themselves at my side, their expressions barely hiding their cautious excitement. "This is painless, right?" "Confirmed. The transference should be instant and mild, maybe a light static shock," Ramirez assured me. The machine loomed before us, a marvel of backyard scientific ingenuity. Dr. Ramirez adjusted his spectacles with trembling hands as he prepared the apparatus. "Are you ready, Mr. Besser?" His voice quivered with a mixture of trepidation. I nodded, trying to keep my heart from thumping so loudly it would give me away. The machine hummed to life, its mechanical screech blending with the pattering rain and the rumble of thunder outside. Electrodes were attached to my temples, sending tiny jolts of electricity through my veins. My vision blurred, and reality faded into a whirlpool of darkness. And then, with a surge of energy, I was transported into another world. Colors exploded around me, vibrant, clear. I found myself standing in a bustling city square, neon signs casting an otherworldly glow. The memories of another person flooded my senses, a wave of emotions and experiences. I was no longer Steve Besser, petty thief with a troubled past. In this strange fusion of two minds, I became someone else entirely. Unfamiliar faces flickered in and out of focus, their voices fragmented whispers, but I could taste their bitterness, feel the warmth of an embrace, and smell the stench of their fear. Through the eyes of this other person, I saw a life teeming with affluence. A large penthouse apartment on Park Avenue, packed with extravagance now unguarded. Then, like a bolt of lightning, I jolted back into consciousness, my body drenched in sweat. Ramirez and Martin stood over me, watching intently, their eyes somehow filled with both awe and concern. The memory transference had given me a glimpse into another person's world. "Everything okay?" Ramirez confirmed. I was speechless, still absorbing what had just happened, but I sat up and nodded as Martin removed the electrodes. "All that was from him?" I asked, pointing behind the curtain. Ramirez sheepishly nodded. "How many times have you done this?" "Actually, don't tell me," I muttered as I got to my feet. "You'll be able to access the memories like your own, but stimuli help speed up the process. Here's the deceased's information. Once you're a few blocks away, the instincts should kick in." Martinez instructed. "And him?" I motioned to the body behind the curtain. "He won't go anywhere," Martinez grinned. In the heart of the affluent Park Avenue district, I approached the luxury apartment building from my visions. The fancy facade and opulent surroundings contrasted sharply with the shadows hanging over my own life. But I didn't let that distract me. I needed to focus. As I neared the entrance, the visions started to overlap with my own sight, swirling like a roadmap in my mind. I saw myself, dressed in a tailored suit, walking toward the doorman with an air of confidence. Mirroring the vision, I confidently said, "Grant," as I passed the towering figure. He gave me a respectful nod, just as I expected. With the visions guiding me, I approached the porter, my movements smooth and calculated. "Good evening, Barry," I greeted him, echoing the memory. His eyes warmed ever so slightly, something about me triggering a vague sense of familiarity. With a curt nod, he gestured for me to continue. I stepped into the grand lobby, my adrenaline rising with the thrill of the heist. In the elevator, I pulled out a set of lockpicks from my pocket, feeling the weight of each tool. Level 15. The vision guided me like a compass, and I marched down the hall, my instinct leading the way. When I reached the door, I manipulated the tumblers. The lock yielded with a soft click. Once inside, my gaze swept across the lavish interior. I pulled out a handheld metal detector, trusted companion on jobs like this. With a flick of a switch, it hummed to life, beeping faintly whenever it detected gold. Methodically, I moved through the rooms, my gloved hand plucking golden trinkets from display cases and tabletop. Each piece was swiftly stowed away in my trusty backpack. Then, a golden family photo frame caught my eye. Handling it with care, I gently removed the photo and placed it on the desk. Frame, a valuable branded piece, found its way into my bag. My attention was suddenly drawn to a key lying in the middle of the coffee table. It was just an ordinary old door key. Something about it demanded my attention. I picked it up, examining it closely. aside from a red dot of nail polish, held no real, unique mystery. I placed it back on the table as I decided I'd spent enough time in harm's way. But just as I prepared to make my exit, the sound of the front door knob turning sent a jolt through me. My heart skipped a beat as the door creaked open. A young woman, her expression was of total confusion, stepped into the apartment. The beam from my headlamp cast a harsh light on her as I froze, caught red-handed. The woman froze. I, however, tried to remain composed, my mind racing to find the perfect cover. Without missing a beat, I slipped into the persona of a maintenance worker. "Apologies for the intrusion, ma'am," I said, keeping my tone calm and authoritative. "I'm here investigating a reported power outage. Seems I've found the problem. It should be resolved shortly." Her initial shock started to fade, my words reassuring her. She hesitated for a moment before offering a tentative smile. "Well, thank you for taking care of it," she replied, still a bit uncertain, but clearly comforted by my confidence. "All in a day's work, ma'am," I said, making my exit before her suspicion could resurface. Rain poured relentlessly over the streets of New York, turning the pavement into a slick, treacherous obstacle. I stepped out of a pawn shop, navigating the narrow alleys with ease as the city's towering skyscrapers loomed above like watchful giants. In the heart of this soaked urban jungle, a dilapidated bar provided a much-needed refuge. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting faint light onto the wet sidewalk. Pushed open the door, entering a haze of dim lighting and the low hum of whiskey-soaked conversations. The pungent scent of stale smoke lingered in the air, exactly the kind of place I could lose myself in for a while. Maggie, the barmaid with a knowing smile and eyes framed by smoky eyeliner, greeted me with a nod. Without a word, she poured me a whiskey, sliding the glass across the worn bar. As the rain continued its assault outside, I found solace in Maggie's company and the Mets game playing on the TV. We talked, sharing fragments of our lives, our hopes, and the burdens we carried. My words flowed like the rain hitting the window, slowly and steadily. I confided in her about my foster father, the man who had raised me and now sat trapped in the fog of Alzheimer's. The mounting medical bills, the weight of his care, and the strain it placed on my meager earnings had driven me deeper into the perilous world of thievery. Maggie moved gracefully down the bar, serving drinks while I let my gaze wander aimlessly until it landed on an oil painting hanging on the wall. It was an idyllic scene, a house with a bright yellow door nestled in suburbia, surrounded by perfectly manicured lawns and white picket fences. The simplicity of the image stirred something in me, a momentary break from the weight of everything on my shoulders. I stared at the painting for a moment, letting it calm my mind before finishing my drink and gathering my things to leave. On my way home, I always found myself drawn to the edge of a particular pier, standing in the cold night air and gazing out across the dark water. My eyes fixated on a towering bridge in the distance, its long, arching span connecting two distant worlds on either side of the bay. For reasons I couldn't explain, the bridge commanded my attention, its silhouette etched against the horizon like a beacon. I had no idea why I felt such a strange pull toward it, but something about it wouldn't let me look away. A cool breeze swept in from the water, ruffling my hair as I stood there, lost in thought. I knew I should be heading home, but I couldn't tear my gaze from the bridge, as if it held some kind of meaning just beyond my grasp. Finally, I forced myself to turn away, that strange sense of purpose pushing me toward home. When I arrived at my apartment, I found my foster father sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. I sat down beside him, watching as his labored breaths filled the room, painful reminder of the disease's relentless grip. Each breath was a testament to the slow, inevitable march toward the end, and I felt the weight of it pressing down on me. I sat there, silently, as the rain continued to pour outside, knowing there was nothing I could do to stop it. I approached the fridge and grabbed a beer, feeling the cold bottle in my hand as I noticed the near-empty bottle of my father's medication. Couldn't help but let out a sigh. Does it ever end? The next few days passed with the same somber routine, tending to my foster father, watching over him as his condition worsened. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, but I couldn't shake it. It was my duty. In the back of my mind, I was desperate for a way out of this life. I searched for honest work, something that would pull me out of the cycle of crime. But every door I knocked on seemed to slam in my face, my criminal record shadowing me like an unshakable curse. I found myself in a pristine white office one afternoon, staring at the final hurdle, an interview for a decent job, chance for a fresh start. The tension in the air was evident to all, and as the interviewer read over my resume, I knew the question was coming, the one that always came. "Mr. Besser, could you please explain the incident on your record?" The interviewer's tone was polite, but I could hear the judgment in their voice. "It's a red flag for us." I took a breath, steadying myself. "That was a mistake," I said, my voice low and steady. "It was born out of loyalty. A friend was in trouble, and I thought I was doing the right thing. It was a bad call, but I believed in protecting the people I cared about, no matter the cost." Silence filled the room, thick with unspoken doubts. The interviewer's gaze wavered as if searching for a reason to believe me, but in the end, they couldn't. "I'm sorry, Mr. Besser," they said, their voice flat. "While we appreciate your honesty, we can't overlook the incident. We're going to have to withdraw our offer." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood, shoulders slumped under the weight of yet another rejection, and made my way out of the office. Outside, the rain poured relentlessly, matching the sinking feeling inside me. But I wasn't done. Defeat wasn't an option. Not today. I found myself in a back alley later, the graffiti-covered walls closing in on me as I met with a dealer. The transaction was quick. Few words exchanged. A small wad of cash passed from my hand to his. In return, he gave me what I needed. Just as I turned to leave, a group appeared at the mouth of the alley. My pulse quickened. I didn't break stride. I walked toward them, pretending not to care. But as I got closer, my instincts kicked in. I could sense trouble. "Look what we got here," one of the punks sneered, stepping into my path, blocking any chance of escape. "Think you can come to our turf and score some gear?" Panic surged through me. I tried to explain, to reason with them, but my words drowned beneath the sound of their threats. Before I knew it, fists and kicks rained down on me. I hit the ground hard, my world spinning, the drugs scattered across the slick pavement, gotten in the chaos. One of the goons bent down, picked up the bottle, and scoffed. "Old man shit." They finally strutted away, satisfied with their display, leaving me beaten and bruised on the wet asphalt. Slowly, I forced myself to my knees, then to my feet, ignoring the sharp pain coursing through my body. I scrambled to collect the scattered pills, my hands trembling. That's when I saw it. Something strange. She. Sitting right there amongst the pill packets was the key from the apartment, with its unmistakable red dot of nail polish. The same key I had left behind. How the hell did it end up here? Too sore to care at that moment, I grabbed the last of the pills and left the key where it lay. The walk home felt like it lasted forever. Limping through the dark streets, soaked and aching, I somehow made it back. I paused outside my apartment, wiped the rain from my face, and entered. Inside, my foster father sat in his usual spot, his cloudy eyes lighting up as he recognized me. "I'm sorry, I got caught in the rain," I lied, trying to muster a smile. "But I've got something for you, something that'll help." His face softened as I handed him the package. I couldn't bear to tell him the truth, not after everything. "Your doctor said this should make things better." "Promised." He nodded, his gratitude simple and quiet, unaware of the lengths I had gone to for. Later, I found myself back at Maggie's bar, staring into the depths of my whiskey glass. The choices, failures, the endless spiral I seemed trapped in. How many more drinks would it take to numb the pain? Just then, my phone buzzed with a message. "We have another one." I left the warmth of the bar, stepping back into the cold streets. The neon lights of the city flickered on, casting a pale glow on the wet pavement. Somewhere deep inside me, a flicker of hope sparked. I wasn't sure how or when, but I was determined to find a way to rise above this mess, to carve out something better. But for now, I had to work with what I had. I returned to the morgue, where Ramirez and Martin awaited me. The room was still dim, cold but familiar. I slid into the metal chair, my body tense but ready. The hum of the machine filled the silence. "You sure you're ready for this?" Ramirez asked, adjusting his glasses. I nodded. There wasn't really a choice anymore. The machine came to life, its hum growing louder. Electrodes pressed against my temples, sending that familiar jolt through my body. My vision blurred again as reality dissolved into a swirling haze. Then, with a surge of energy, I was somewhere else. Colors burst around me, vibrant and intense, until I found myself standing in a bustling cityscape. Neon lights bathed everything in a strange, surreal glow. I wondered where I'd land this time. Soon, the vision sharpened. I stepped out into the street, my surroundings eerily similar to what I had just seen in the transfer. Plush furniture, tasteful artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Every detail lined up with the vision. Following a trail only my subconscious seemed to know, I walked through the dark streets, guided by some unseen force. Step by step, the apartment's layout came back to me. The streetlights cast shadows that mirrored the high-rise windows from my vision. I could feel it. This was where I needed to be. I had no idea what awaited me inside, but I knew one thing for sure. This was far from over. An inexplicable sense of déjà vu washed over me as I turned the corner and found myself standing before a large bridge. I stopped, the sight of it filling me with a familiar knot of anxiety. The sound of the rushing water below echoed in my ears, triggering memories I couldn't fully grasp but felt deep in my bones. My feet felt like they were glued to the pavement, leaving me paralyzed with fear. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My palms were slick with sweat as I gripped the cold railings for support. I knew, deep down, that I needed to cross this bridge to get to whatever lay beyond it. Something inside me hesitated. It was as if the water itself was calling out to my fear, taunting me. I forced one foot forward, trying to block out the churning river below. The bridge creaked under the weight of my steps, and every sound sent a shiver down my spine. My throat tightened, making it hard to breathe. I glanced down at the water again. Bad move. My heart raced even faster. The vast expanse of the river felt like an insurmountable obstacle, reflecting the helplessness I felt in confronting my fears. Images flashed through my mind, quick and sharp. Me leaping into the bay. Cold, dark waters swallowing me whole. I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts aside, but they clung to me. I couldn't afford to freeze like this. I had to cross the bridge, but every step made my legs feel heavier. Doubt gnawed at me, whispering that I wasn't strong enough to overcome this. In the end, fear won out. I took a step back, retreating from the bridge. Not today. I wouldn't reach whatever was on the other side. As I walked away, frustration and disappointment washed over me. I knew I'd have to confront this fear eventually. Today wasn't the day. The morning sun streamed through the curtains, its warmth coaxing me awake. I rubbed my eyes, the remnants of last night's memories, someone else's life, still clinging to me like a fog. As I stretched and tried to make sense of it all, something on the bedside table caught my eye. There it was, the mysterious key, the same one I'd seen in the apartment and later in the alley, now sitting right next to my things as if it had always been there. Its surface gleamed in the soft morning light, and the small red dot of nail polish at the top confirmed my suspicion. It was the same key. I reached for it, my mind buzzing with questions. How had the key found its way here? Who had marked it with that distinctive red dot? The memories from the last transference were still fresh, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this key was somehow tied to everything. As I held it in my hands, I felt an odd connection to it, like it held the answer to more than just a door. But for now, I had more pressing concerns. My father's medication, it was running out again. I checked the countless pillboxes scattered across the kitchen counter, but almost all were empty. The anxiety I'd felt earlier on the bridge returned, this time tied to the endless struggle to afford the medication that kept my father going. I got dressed quickly, my mind a mess. "Morning, son, sleep well?" My father greeted me with his usual smile as I stepped into the small kitchen. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile of my own. I didn't want to worry him with my own problems. "I slept all right. Gotta head out, but I'll be back later. Okay?" The prescription in hand, I left the apartment, my thoughts clouded by the need to find a solution. There was only one place I could think of. Moab. I knocked on the metal door, hard, and waited. Eventually, Dr. Ramirez answered. "Is there any chance I could get another transfer today?" I asked, trying to keep the pleading edge out of my voice. The doctor hesitated, glancing away. We don't have any new transferences available right now. We're still vetting candidates. I didn't have time to wait. I'll take anything you've got, I said, almost begging. I'll make it work. Dr. Ramirez looked at me for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. All right, I do have one available, but I have to warn you, we don't know much about this one's memories. I nodded. I'll take it. Whatever it was, I had to believe it would help. I didn't have the luxury of being picky. The doctor led me to the transfer chair, and I took a seat, cold metal beneath me already familiar. Dr. Ramirez began preparing the equipment, his hands moving methodically, but I could sense an underlying hesitation. As the transfer started, I felt myself slipping away, sinking into the depths of another consciousness. Faces flickered in front of me, disjointed, blurry, being pulled from the recesses of a distant, half-forgotten life. A house appeared in the middle of it all, white picket fence, clean-cut grass. It looked like something from an idyllic family sitcom. But something about it felt wrong. Unlike my previous transfers, this one was tainted. The memories were twisted, vibrant on the surface, but threaded with an unsettling darkness beneath. A nagging unease settled deep within me, a toxin spreading through my veins. I knew this place. I knew the people in it, but the familiarity only deepened the confusion. I struggled to piece together the fragmented images bombarding my senses, but nothing made sense. The sensations were too real. They weren't just echoes of another life. They were sharp, discomforting, and disturbingly wrong. When the transfer ended, I jolted back to reality, drenched in cold sweat. My hands were trembling, my heart racing. Dr. Ramirez was watching me, confused. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice shaky. I nodded, even though nothing was all right. I couldn't find the words to explain what I had just experienced. That creeping unease clung to me. I left the morgue, stepping back into a gray yet stormy day. The sky rumbled with thunder, perfect reflection of the turmoil brewing inside me. As I went through the motions of my daily routine, I started noticing things, small cracks in my perception. My vision distorted at random moments, as though the world itself was warping. Once I caught my reflection in a bodega mirror, but what stared back wasn't fully me. It was like my face had merged with someone else's, someone I couldn't recognize but felt terrifyingly familiar. The city itself began to shift around me. The shadows of people passing by seemed to dance and swirl unnaturally, their forms twisting into grotesque shapes that made my skin crawl. Sounds, too, became warped and dissonant. Constant hum of traffic, the murmur of voices, all of it assaulted my senses, sending my anxiety spiraling. Something from that transfer was trying to reach me, to communicate in a language I didn't understand. The memories I'd inherited, they weren't just pieces of another life. They were secrets. Dark ones, and I couldn't decipher them. I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind or if these sensations were real. Every day felt like I was falling further into some kind of waking nightmare. Then, there was the figure. That was just the start. The next story is even more unsettling. My neighbor is a creep. Hi everyone. Not sure if this is the right sub, as it came up when I searched about insomnia, but I feel like I should tell this here because I don't think anyone else would believe me if I posted it anywhere else. Anyway, my posting this all started with my weird neighbor. He moved in next to me a couple of months ago and has mostly been a shut-in. I've only seen him a few times, and he creeps me out every time. The first time I ever met him was when he moved in. He looked relatively normal, albeit a little sweaty and dirty, and gave me this strange look as I walked up to greet him. "Hi, welcome to blank. It's really nice to meet you. I look forward to seeing you more." He turned around, smiling widely. "Have you heard of him?" "Of who?" He looked at me like I was speaking a different language, before bowing his head almost reverently and gasping the next words like a chant. "Him, he who speaks the gruesome words in prayer, gives dire sermons in the abhorrent. He shows us the way in the revolting and paints the horrific in unholy murals. His eyes twinkle with every word, body shaking with rising intensity as he grabbed my shoulders and pulled me close, whispering hoarsely into my ear. He guides us in what is unnatural and teaches us to be his children. You'll know him soon." With this, he laughed huskily, shoulders shaking as he shuffled away into his house. Ever since then, every night, I can hear him laughing and whispering through the walls. He thumps his hands against the walls and the floor and screams. I can hear someone else talking. It's not as clear, though, more like a deep murmur than the high-pitched warbling voice of my neighbor. I've tried to research about whatever he was talking about when I met him, but nothing has ever came up. In all of my searching, only one result had ever came up. Writings and reports from someone called Detective W. I've skim-read it, but one passage really stood out to me. It was someone else who W reported on, someone who also obsessed over he who shows us in the way, in the revolting, whatever that meant. She kept chanting over and over about him. She has devolved into being locked into her room, stamping the floor, shouting about how he will save her. She has made a large dent into the walls of her room where she repeatedly smashes her head, and when eventually she started bleeding, she would rub the blood into strange sigils on the ground and roll around in them, while crying hysterically, as we saw in the final inspection into the room before she shut herself in completely. My team and I did manage to break the door down, but we were far too late. Whatever I could attempt to depict about the scene that was presented to us as we entered the room would not manage to emphasize the gravity and horror of her condition. She was too far gone. There was no saving her now. It just stuck in my mind. My neighbor had started down that same path as this mystery person who was too far gone after a while. I know it wasn't my place, but I started to spy on him, just to be safe. For weeks, I would watch him through my window and try to catch him when he was rarely outside of the house. He had become more of a shut-in than usual, only coming out to pick up food orders and to check the coast was clear. I reasoned with myself that I was just concerned for my neighbor and worried for his safety, but I knew deep down I just wanted to see whatever too far gone was like. There was one night last week where I saw my neighbor open his door like usual to pick up his takeout order, but there was nothing to pick up. He didn't appear at the door either, just quickly unlocked the door and then ran out, leaving it swaying gently in the breeze of the night. I tried to fight my rising curiosity, but I felt my legs move to creep to his front door before I could reason with myself any further. Opening his door slowly, I called out my neighbor's name with no response. The stench of rotting food hit my nose in a damp waft. His house was in seeming disrepair. Dark stains on the floor and walls, rotten food smothered into the carpet and piled up high on the counters, and dishes and other decorations smashed into the walls, gathering into piles in the floor. It looked like he had been robbed. I began to think that he wasn't home, but then I heard a shuddered, faint sob from one of the rooms upstairs. Moving up the stairs quietly, careful to dodge the piled-up trash and mysterious damp stains, I came to the hallway, lime-lit in crimson. Red light seemed to be streaming through a sliver in the doorframe of the room the sob came from. All I could hear was hushed breathing and uncontrollable sobs from whoever was in the room, followed by silence. I had to look closer. Through a sliver in the doorframe, I saw, bathed in a reddish glow, there kneeled my neighbor. He had a video playing on his laptop that could only be described as a deep, warbling audio of someone speaking, followed by the occasional laugh and another deep voice of someone replying. I couldn't make out what was being said, but my neighbor's shoulders shook as he leaped along to whatever was being said. Then there was a reprieve. Whatever was playing on the laptop stopped. Only faint static could be heard. Finally looking up, my neighbor reached around behind him. He had tears still streaming down his face. A shaking, apprehensive sigh and a solemn look on his face, he sawed a finger off. I could feel my pulse roaring in my ears. I was unable to tear my eyes away from what was unfolding in front of me. With the finger now gushing blood, my neighbor cried out. He jabbed his finger onto the floor and drew something, an ornate and jagged sigil that read the letter H. His body began to writhe and shake in a crumpled heap on the floor. The blood from the sigil smeared on the floor and over his clothes as he wailed and screamed. It looked like something was moving around underneath his skin. His arms and legs bent in unnatural angles, rolling over before somehow getting to his knees like before. He screamed and screamed, over and over, horrific wailing filling the room, before finally, it all stopped. His body stayed there, in that kneel, until his eyes rolled back and his mouth opened to an unnatural degree. Red, viscous liquid flooded from his eyes, nose, and down his chin as a loud, booming voice came out of him like a speaker. He is here. He will accept you into his dire light once you give yourself as a vessel for him, for he shows the way in the revolting and paints the horrific in unholy murals. My neighbor clamped his mouth shut before his neck bent into an unnatural angle to face me, looking me directly in the eyes. His bones creaked and moaned as they bent his legs and arms. He went from kneeling to galloping unsteadily towards me in a split second, leaving me no time to react. He jumped towards me, screeching as he managed to grab one of my ankles in my mad dash away from him as he dragged me into his room. I got a good look at his face up close as he loomed over me. The red liquid from earlier had dried on his cheeks and his chin, but still dripped from his eyes. His eyes had completely clouded over, with the H sigil being seemingly burned into his forehead now. He grabbed my shoulders with shaking hands as he raised what was left of his finger to my forehead. I squeezed my eyes shut, unable to move, frozen in fear. He drew the sigil on my forehead before bowing his head to whisper in my ear, "He'll be with you soon." He then passed out suddenly, landing suddenly on the floor next to me. I ran out of that house as fast as my legs would allow. Luckily, none of my other neighbors saw me in that state. I don't care what happens to my neighbor at this point. I didn't even close the door behind me as I ran to my bathroom to scrub the sigil off of my forehead. I had 5 showers in a row since then, and I shower twice daily and scrub my face until it's red. It's been a few weeks since then, and I've been having crazy dreams every night ever since. It starts off normal, then morphs into this face. It looks so uncanny. It has black eyes far too big for its face, and a wide smile with a few too many teeth. It stretches its face so far the skin tears. I don't sleep much now, and I haven't been going to work recently because of these dreams. I've started to research if other people see this face as much as I do. Nothing. I think I'm going crazy. Whenever it's quiet in my house now, I feel like I can hear someone or something walking around downstairs and creeping up the stairs. Every time I open my door and check, there's nothing there, and the noise stops for a few hours before starting up again. Probably the sleep deprivation, but I can't function properly anymore. One night, I let the noise go further and further up the stairs, coming across the hall, before clicking open the lock to my door with ease. I rolled over as fast as I can and pretended to sleep. It knew I was awake. Makes this faint, deep, warbling murmur from the back of its throat before breathing heavily for what seemed like hours. I can feel it move closer to me, putting its large head close to mine, looming close enough that I can hear the squeak as it grinds its teeth. It stays there, staring a hole in the back of my head for hours as I can see the outline of its head from the shadow on my wall. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I can't tell what's real and what's a dream anymore. I keep telling myself that whatever is behind me is a dream, but the dark marks on the floor and the heavy thumping of my heartbeat is otherwise. He's here for me. He who shows the way in the revolting and paints the horrific in unholy murals. If you thought that was creepy, wait until you hear what's next. My time in apartment 87. For the past 9 years, I've been living in the same apartment complex, occupying apartment number 87, in a small little town smack dab in the center of New Mexico. For the sake of some anonymity, we'll say my name is Zach. It's idyllic to some and a nightmare for others. See, this apartment complex is one of 3 or so things this town has going for it. Complex, the church, and the gas station. Perfect little triangle of mediocrity. If you're into small talk, long days of nothingness, and the occasional ghost hunter or self-proclaimed healer, preacher, what have you, then this place is just a little slice of paradise. 13 years ago, I left college halfway through my second year after having a bit of a breakdown. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I know I wasn't going to get any satisfaction wasting my inheritance on lectures and tuition. My parents and I had always loved a good adventure, be it hiking, camping, or long road trips to nowhere. Sitting in a stuffy dorm room for 2 years, then renting a dingy campus house, didn't sit right with me. I sold a lot of what I had besides my phone, computer, and car, and set off. I traveled west as far as my car could take me, hitting every little nook and cranny I could find, and that's how I ended up here. With a few sputters and some black smoke spilling from the exhaust, my destination was set for me. For reasons I'll get to later, I'd rather not divulge exactly where I'm talking about, i.e. some of you are crazy, and this place doesn't need more of that. Like I said above, we have the three main attractions of this desolate oasis. We can start with the church. It is, in fact, just a regular old church. Nothing hiding in the basement. There isn't one, and no crazy sacrifices happening on the weekend. I know that the pastor, John, lives in the back room with his little dog, Charles. He doesn't ever really step foot in the complex, even for food. Actually, as I'm writing this out, I can only think of 2 times I've ever seen him step foot near the complex. One of the second-floor tenants, Ms. Meyer, brings him lunch and supper every day. Clockwork. There's a good handful of people that attend church every Sunday morning, religiously, and every couple of weeks there's some sort of happening in the yard adjacent to it. Cookout or birthday party. We all usually attend those. It's a nice time, and no one's ever pushy. The church is a nice little constant for all of us, even those who don't practice. Even in the worst of times, you can look out the window and see Pastor John tending to his little flower garden or taking his dog on a walk, and it'll bring a smile to your face. The gas station is the town's gossip center. Most people who pass through town stop in to top off their tanks, drain their bladders, and grab an, albeit probably slightly expired, drink or snack before hitting the road again. You know the way gas station workers are depicted in 80s movies? A younger guy, a little burnt out, and always just a little bit high. Now add about 65 pounds, 25 years, and a receding hairline, and boom, you've got yourself a Winkle. James Van Winkle to his parents, who he inherited the place from, and just Winkle to us here in town. You can't walk down the street without hearing the faint, fuzzy tubes of Night Ranger or Whitesnake playing through the aisles and open doors of the gas station. Station, as I call it, seeing as it doesn't have a name or even a real sign. I actually tend to spend a bit more time there than most of the other residents. Winkle is a cool guy and actually lives a few doors down from me in the complex. Sometimes he invites me over to watch movies, and yes, they are on VHS, but it's always a good time. He stays in the back of the station, a nice little room, decorated like it's right out of Back to the Future, Tube TV, posters and all. The apartment complex is really the shining light of the town. It's basically its own little ecosystem, and has been since the owner, Mr. Rags, built it sometime back in the 70s. I think it may have been part of a social living experiment that just turned into a full-time thing. Mr. Rags sounds like a funny last name, but it's the only one he's ever given the tenants here. Nobody knows if it's just a fun joke he started, since he only dresses himself in linen shirts and pants, or if it is actually his given name. As is written in any story, he does live at the top of the complex, on the 17th floor. The highest occupied level is actually the 15th, and there isn't a button on the ancient elevator for the 16th floor. Everyone seems to think it's just a floor for HVAC or storage or something, but I have my own thoughts on that. Following the ecosystem-like setup, the complex has a kitchen downstairs that's communal, but it's always served as a cafeteria of sorts. A portion of everyone's rent goes into a fund, and a couple that lives on floor 15 go to the nearest grocery with it, then cook lunch and dinner every weeknight. The rest of the time, it's fend for yourself, which really isn't bad considering we have plenty of leftovers in the fridges, a lot of easy-to-prepare food in the freezers, and a heaping stockpile of cereal and milk. Couple usually cooks extra meals, though, for both the pastor and Mr. Rag. As for the reason of my post, I guess it'd be twofold. I've been here going on almost 10 years now, which is something I never thought I'd do. I didn't think I'd be leaving a claustrophobic atmosphere of college labs and dorm rooms to end up loving such a speck of a town like this place. I guess I want to just get my thoughts down as a way to wrap my head around that. And the second reason, this place isn't okay. I don't have any other way to describe it. Waking up every day, going to sleep every night, something just doesn't feel right. It's a constant, but not one that drives people away. On the contrary, I think it brings them in. It's rarely ever been anything too malicious or evil, but it's gotten very close to crossing that line more times than I or the others would like. I guess I think the stories I've heard and the things I've seen with my own eyes deserve a carved-out little corner of the ether. That'd be you, Internet. I'll start us off with something light, right from the day I arrived. It was July 3rd, 2015, and hot as ever. I'd just driven through a little mining town, its last remaining residents clinging to whatever they had left to call theirs. I was about 2 hours away from any sort of population center that I knew of, when my car started to make some not-so-nice sounds. It lasted every bit of 5 minutes until the black smoke started to pour out of the hood. I pulled off to the side of half-baked road I was on and opened up the beast's belly. I'd never been good with cars, so it was a futile effort. I sat there for about an hour, service on my phone going in and out, when I heard the low rumble of an old car cresting the horizon. It took a minute or two to come into view, but my savior was inching his way towards me. A wood-paneled station wagon with none other than my would-be friend Winkle came into full view as he slowed down to see the burnt-out mess on the shoulder. "Dude, what's up?" "Everything does not look so good over there," he said, a look of genuine worry on his face. "Yeah, I don't know. I was driving along, and it seems like she's really given up on me this time. You know any towing companies around? I haven't seen anything for miles." Yeah, man," he chuckled. "There's not much out here at all. You're about 3 hours from the nearest anything, man. You want to catch a ride with me into the station? I've got a phone there you can use, or computer, or whatever. No catch, man." He seemed all right, patting the seat excitedly. "Okay, man, I really appreciate it," I said as I hopped into the car. It was surprisingly clean, aside from the few moon pie wrappers on the floorboard. It was a pretty fun ride, to be honest. Winkle started blaring some Def Leppard for a while, then turned it down and gave me the same gist about the town that I did for you guys above. To say I was intrigued would be an understatement. This was just the kind of thing I love to find while traveling. It took us about an hour to get into town, and we went right to the station. Winkle excitedly showed me the place, taking me through the little history it had, about his parents and how he runs it all now. While we were inside, it seemed that word had somehow already gotten around that new guy was in town. Few of the residents were out on the church lawn with the pastor, peeking down the road to check on us. I think they thought they were being sly, but we could tell. Winkle showed me the phone, and I called down for the nearest tow truck. About 5 days, then we have to figure out what's wrong with it. Could be another 5 days, what they told me. I think Winkle was eavesdropping, because as soon as they said it, he came ripping out of the back room. "You can stay at the complex, or you can stay over here, but I've only got this old blow-up mattress. Kind of sucks. I'll introduce you to Mr. Rags." Before I had time to answer, he was out the door, jogging down to the complex. The residents outside just watched as he bounced to the front entrance intercom and buzzed the number. "Mr. Rags, 1701. A few of the residents looked annoyed, like this wasn't the first time he's tried to get a hold of him for one thing or another. I couldn't tell what they were saying, but he seemed to exchange a few words with the intercom before smiling and gesturing over to me. I crept out of the station entrance hesitantly and walked myself over to him. "Mr. Rags says to come on up. Fair warning, this place is a little weird, but I don't think it'll ever hurt you. Mr. Rags is also a little funny, we'll say, but he's really nice. I told him I have a good feeling about you, man. Let's go." He gestured for me to follow him through the big iron doors of the entrance. As soon as I stepped through the threshold, I knew I wouldn't be leaving. I don't know any other way to describe it, but it felt like my entire life had been lived here. It was like I'd been here for 100 years and knew every little indescribable detail. It was welcoming, warming, but also horrifying. We brushed past a few potted plants and low-sitting chairs to reach the small, antique-looking elevator. Everything in the lobby was bathed in a nice, warm glow from the Art Deco-style lights on the walls. The elevator didn't seem unsafe, and it has just been inspected, though I wasn't too afraid of going up 17 floors in it. We hopped in, and Winkle hit the number. clicked with a comforting tactile sound, and the doors closed as it pushed us up towards our destination. Winkle was grinning the entire time, which started to freak me out. He was a little too excited for me to meet this Mr. Rags. Trip took way less time than I had thought it would, almost like we went up 17 floors in 5 seconds. The bell dinged, and the doors opened to a small entryway, one ornate-looking door at the end of it. 1701, it read on a plaque above it. Winkle nodded ahead, beckoning me to knock on the door. The entry was sparse. A little table with a vase whose flowers were looking just shy of death stood to our left, and a small couch sat opposite it. I tiptoed off the elevator and towards the door. As we drew closer, I could hear a series of locks begin their sequence, and the door slowly crept open. Mr. Rags stood there, a soft smile on his face. "You must be Zach," he said. "Mr. Van Winkle explained your predicament over the intercom. I hear it could be a week or more until you have a working vehicle?" "Yes, sir, but I don't want to be a bother. I can find a motel around here. I'm sure there's something in the next town." "Oh, well, there is another small town up the way, about an hour or so, but the motel there closed down years ago. It's mainly a family-run store, some knick-knack shops, and a gas station." I felt a little defeated. The entire time I was traveling, I'd never run into an issue like this. I was quite literally stranded in the middle of nowhere. "I can see this situation must be difficult for you, but I wouldn't worry. You seem like a guy with a good head on his shoulders. Do you do anything for work?" he asked. I hadn't worked a real job in years, but I was pretty handy. My dad had shown me basic repair work, besides cars. And I feel like a genius when I have access to Google. About a year ago, we had a resident move out rather abruptly. He actually worked for the complex. For me, really. Odds and ends, repair work and whatnot. You strike me as a man who could make his way in a situation like that. He was a particularly clean person, so the things he left behind are in immaculate condition. If you'd like, why don't you stay there for the week? Once your car is repaired, you can be on your way, if the place doesn't grow on you, that is. He grinned a peculiar smile, stretching his face. In that moment, I swear I could feel something extremely, alarmingly wrong with his smile, but his charm won me over. We talked a little while longer, and I agreed to check out the apartment on the 8th floor, apartment 87. Feels eerie typing this out now, 9 years later. The apartment was in every sense immaculate. It was fully furnished, complete with blankets, bedding, towels, and even some food in the fridge. Things seemed to be dusted even. They have been waiting on someone to move in. To keep my rambling down, as this post has already gone on long enough, I did stay the full week, and then some. My car took 3 weeks to get back in working order, and cost me more than I'd hoped. Those first 3 weeks, I did some small repairs, helped different residents out, and got to know a good portion of them. It was honestly the most fun and fulfilling time I had experienced in a number of years. I also experienced my first of many, many strange experiences. I have plenty of stories to share, but I'll leave you with the first. The first night in, after dealing with everything that day, I was exhausted. I opted to sleep on the couch with a blanket in lieu of sleeping between the sheets of an unknown bed. Just before falling asleep, I heard a shrill animal scream outside. It sent shivers down my spine and made me leap up towards the window. As I tried focusing my eyes to the darkness outside, a small, whitish figure was standing down by a bundle of cacti. It took a few moments, but as my eyesight adjusted, I could tell it was Mr. Rags. He was holding what looked like a wild goat. There are plenty in the region, and the hills around the town seemed like perfect terrain for them. I figured maybe he was just out for a stroll and found the poor thing wounded, but I soon realized that Mr. Rags was the one who had wounded it. I stared in disbelief as he gnawed at its neck, its body slowly falling lifeless below him. It took 2 or 3 minutes before he finished as he gently laid it down, inspected it, then picked it back up over his shoulder. I was still sitting in the window, shrouded by the darkness of the room when he looked up. I froze, but I swear I saw him give a sheepish grin before he walked off towards the front of the building. I expected him to come knocking at my door. That time never came. Instead, the next night, a note was slid under my door. To our newest resident, we humbly welcome you to your first night of supper downstairs in the cafe. Tonight, we're serving curried goat. The first story gave us chills, but the next one might be even worse. Rats. Great, another rat. I'd mutter this line to myself almost every day. You see, I just recently inherited a house from my late grandparent. It's a fairly large house, and it didn't look to be in a rough condition, so my cat Bob and I decided to immediately move in, even if find out later on that the house has some hidden flaws. At the time, I thought anything is better than paying rent for a tiny apartment. Soon enough, I found out how wrong I was. The house itself is fine. Actually, it's great. It has tons of rooms and looked like it won't be much of a money drain. The only thing that requires a decent investment is getting the walls painted. The problem, however, is that it's almost impossible to push through a day without seeing at least a couple of large rats. What I'm dealing with isn't your typical rat infestation. It's so bad that I dread going to the bathroom because I fully expect another furry little bastard to greet me once again while excitedly chewing on my toothbrush. Bob isn't really a rat hitman, but considering he's an old chubby cat that can barely remember where the litter box is, I'd say he's doing his best. He manages to defeat a rat from time to time in a rough one-on-one battle, but unfortunately goes to sleep right after the fight. I tried using some rat traps, but they seem to be useless in the long run. They simply multiply faster than I can get rid of them. But I also must admit I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, so I forgot where I put the traps, and then I step on them every once in a while. It's not my fault that my memory is probably worse than Bob's. The worst place in the house is the attic, or as I like to call it, the lair. The attic must be their favorite spot in the whole house. Late at night, I can hear the fuzzy beasts skittering in the attic. Sounds like there's hundreds, if not thousands of them. Soft, fast steps, loud, heavy thumps, screeches. Not only that, but sometimes it sounds like they're opening the attic door just so they can sneakily steal some cheese from my fridge. I don't have the needed courage to check the attic out for myself. I'd probably get a heart attack after opening the attic door and seeing a rat avalanche falling on top of me. I've already contacted a rat exterminator. He told me he'll pay me a visit next week, so as far as I'm concerned, he can deal with the attic. Earlier, I made a joke about the rats stealing food from my fridge, but I was only half kidding. If I leave any food on the kitchen table before I go to bed, it will get nibbled on or straight up devoured overnight. I once left a nice meatball sub wrapped in foil on the kitchen table. In the morning, I was surprised to see most of it was eaten. Based on the bite marks, it looks like they chewed through the foil and even enjoyed the taste of it. Sometimes random items from my fridge go missing, but to be fair, that probably isn't their fault. More likely, I just forgot when I ate that food. Now that you know the most important points, here's where things get weird. One night, I was watching a movie while Bob was being a good boy, snuggled up next to me, like usual. All of a sudden, he jumped off the couch. I was surprised to see my usually sluggish cat move that hastily. It looked like he found something next to the couch, but before I can even react to what he did, he jumped back on top of the couch. As soon as I looked at Bob's jaw, I was frozen by a strange mix of confusion and fear. In his mouth, he was carrying a small rat. That isn't what scared me. What scared me is the fact that this rat's head was missing. Ripped, bloody flesh was all that was remaining. Only a couple of seconds passed, and then it hit me. Bob didn't do this. He only found it. There's no way he could have ripped its head clean off and swallowed it in seconds. Even if Bob was a lightning-fast rat murderer, the rat would have at least let out some sort of screech of pain before its demise. I put on my rubber gloves and threw the headless rat in the garbage while almost vomiting out of disgust. Unfortunately, it didn't end there. 3 days later, I found another headless rat corpse under the carpet and 2 decaying rat heads behind the couch. I read some articles online that say cannibalism among rats isn't uncommon, so at the time, that was my only explanation. A day passed after that discovery. In the middle of the night, I was shifting in my bed while Bob was sleeping in his usual spot right next to my feet. Once again, I could hear the sound of rats screeching and running around in the attic. With each passing second, I was getting more and more annoyed. Finally, one more time, I hear what sounds like the attic door opening and closing. I brush that off. I thought I was mishearing things, or just hallucinating because of the lack of sleep. Suddenly, I realize that I have left half of my cheeseburger on the living room table. I get out of bed slowly, trying not to wake up Bob, while groggily walking towards the living room. Before entering the living room, I took a moment to mentally prepare for what I might see in the living room. I expected to see a couple of dirty rats munching on my juicy cheeseburger. What I saw was incomparably worse. I immediately regretted turning the light on. Instead of a couple of rats feasting on my food, I saw a sickly old man covered in warts and pimples sitting on the living room couch. He was so pale that I wondered if he ever saw the sun. He was wearing a dusty, ragged black robe. He wasn't wearing any footwear. His feet were covered in warts, just like the rest of his body. Both his nails and toenails were long and charcoal black. I was scanning him slowly with my eyes, completely stunned. Even though I turned on the lights, he paid no attention to me. He started opening his mouth. Under the dry lips, I could see a set of dark yellow teeth. Then I noticed a rat squirming and screeching desperately in his hand. The sickly man brought the rat close to his mouth, and without even a moment of hesitation, he bit down on the poor creature's head. With a loud crunch, he bit off the rat's head and swallowed it whole. An audible gulp instantly followed. As he finished, his gaze turned towards me. His soulless gray pupils couldn't stop staring at me. His neutral expression slowly morphed into an expression of pure anger. I could see the veins on his bald head start bulging. I was frozen solid in fear. Couldn't even take a step while the disturbing man jumped off the couch and unnervingly got on all fours like some wild animal. In what felt like a second or two, he started sprinting on all fours, pounced towards the window. He headbutted the window with surprising power, causing it to shatter as he jumped out of the house and squealed like some sort of wounded pig. He ran away into the darkness, while I was staring at the destroyed window in disbelief. A couple of weeks passed after this incident. The house is finally wrapped. After the police did their investigation, they were able to tell me a couple of things that were both informative and frightening. They told me that the intruder was living in the attic for at least a month. They did a full sweep of the attic and found multiple rat corpses scattered around the attic. They also found bags and bags of rancid trash. Their theory was that the intruder was gathering trash and bringing it to the attic in hope of luring as many rats as possible to his location. Surprisingly, the most disturbing discovery wasn't anything that was found in the attic. Under my bed, they found multiple headless rat corpses. Oklahoma ivy cases 1. Plant that solves world hunger. Evolution is a mystifying concept. Traits passed down over decades, all to improve what once was into what will be. In actuality, evolution is the antithesis of change. Truly, there is no bounds as to what can be changed by evolution. Perhaps one day humans will grow antennas atop their noggins for near hive mind-like communication. And when that day comes, no longer will people need to pay the phone bill. Sigh. Still have to pay that off. Regardless, evolution is a fascinating topic of study, full of mystery and intrigue. Now this semester you can expect to learn all about genes, DNA, chromosomes. I remember the simpler times when my field of work was first drip-fed to me by the ever-eccentric biology teacher, Mr. Wingsworth at Jackson High. Sure, his rambling got stale quickly, and the frantic need to entertain the masses, aka uninterested high schools, was certainly not my preferred learning environment. But this would be remembered as my favorite class to this day, not because the teacher was notable, or because it was easy to get by-in. No, this class had opened my eyes to endless possibility. Every day at 12:30 after lunch, my time would be spent in deep thought about the future. My future, my children's future, heck, the future of the planet. All the what-ifs, if-onlys. I learned that evolution and genetics are the building blocks to life itself. And if life could change just like that, there is no telling what is and is not possible. You ever just know when you find something that you want to do for the rest of your life? For me, this was it. A few years later, I had earned my PhD in genetics. In that time, I met so many wonderful people, and all was good. One of my best friends now, I had met on the very first day in university, named Wayne Klinks. Wayne was the laid-back guy who always managed to get things done, albeit his way. I was always angry how easygoing his attitude was. We made good lab partners, and even after university decided to work with this small company near my hometown. The company was focused on genetic plant modification research and development, going by the name Synthesis. Wayne was the one who talked me into it. He said it's local and fairly low-key, pays well, and has a decent reputation for such a new company. Synthesis was founded by one man who no one has seen, talking to, or heard from, at least no one working at the lab. Other than that, the place felt like home to us two scholars. The team consisted of myself, Wayne, 2 other women, and 6 men, a total of 10. Now that you are all caught to speed, it is time I discuss what really brings me here. Our work at Synthesis was not what we thought it would be. Now I'm caught up in something that I may never return from, and the entire world will suffer for what a small team of scientists have done. And it all started with the veloberry. I thought it was odd how we were given so much freedom to do our own research and run our own experiment, but with one catch. The result had to solve a problem. We were mailed one phrase in the mail by the founder, and only would receive another when the last had been completed to satisfaction. It was that very first order that made clear to me that working here would indeed change the world around us. Phrase we received was world hunger. The room was so quiet, could hear a pin drop as the saying goes. Not one of us was sure if this was seriously what we had to solve by altering plant DNA. Haha, happy April 1st. But no other information was given, and the clock was ticking. We really did have to find a way to solve world hunger right here in this dingy old lab. I wish we could say that we got right to work, but brainstorming ideas took weeks. Larger fruit? No, too long to crossbreed. What about more fruit yield? Yeah, but that can get complicated for the plant. Then Wayne came out of nowhere saying, what about something small that's easy to grow in most environments, and it can be very space efficient? Fruit yield, it can grow 4 to 8 small berries per cycle. The man who managed the discussion took a glance around at all of us, eventually saying, any objections to Mr. Klinks? Everyone shook their heads. Then that's settled. Now all we need to do is decide what base plants we need to pull this off. 3 days of research was all we needed to proceed onto the tests. Turns out that grass, you know, the stuff most likely to be found in your yard, was prime candidate number 1. Grew quickly, had a simple structure to manipulate, and best of all, conserved space. The vision was that if this plant were to go public, the lawns across the country would be undeniably bursting. Fruitful potential. It would be like a garden stretching the entire property line. It could be grown domestically, commercial, even remotely. It was our best shot at solving this vague problem from the mailbox. Now we needed another parent plant that would serve as the fruit. We wanted a grass-like base with a thicker fruit-yielding stem able to support the weight. While researching, one of the women found a particularly rare wild berry species. It was unfortunately vine-based, meaning that it would be challenging to coat a thick stem into the genes of either parent species. It must have been 5 weeks before the first significant breakthrough, and the rest flowed smoothly here on out. My job was to troubleshoot potential issues that the resulting offspring may face developmentally, along with my new partner Kendrick, who is much more experienced than I. We came up with 2 main concerns. First is the competition, specifically weeds and such. That was simple. All there was to it was to develop a more aggressive and intertwined root system that has the added bonus of spreading at a much faster rate. This would also eliminate the need for weed killer, but pesticide will become more necessary in turn. The other issue was length. Usually grass, if untrimmed, can grow to unsightly proportions. It's why lawnmowers exist, but you already know that. What if we remove the need to trim this plant by altering its blade growth? We gave the notes we made to the development team, which Wayne was part of. After half a year of work, there it was, Vitalis fructus, or the veloberry. Here is the classified information. Vitalis fructus veloberry parent genome. Lawn grass redacted description. Short height, multi-seasonally flowering, fast-growing fruit, aggressive root embedding, and high fiber concentration in fruit. Uses, outcompetes weeds and regular grass, self-spreading sustainability. Fast-growing fruit, high in fiber, vitamins, and water. Stays below 5 inches. Feeds local bird and primary consumer populations. Has colorful flowers when in bloom. Note, increased prey attention could result in increased predator sighting. Conditions: moderate climate with medium soil pH level. Development location Jackson, OK. Date finalized 03/16/09, 12:48 a.m. To whoever finds this leak, you must understand that I am putting myself at a high risk just to even entertain the idea of the existence of what I'm disclosing. So please understand that it will take time before I get another opportunity to release everything. I will have to slowly get the word out to the public over time. But if doing this will put a stop to what is going on here, then the risk is worth taking. ID: Genesis 2:16-17. My child, you are free to eat from any tree in my garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For when you eat it, you will certainly... Oklahoma Ivy Cases 1, The Plant That Solved World Hunger, written by Jacob Spaulding. And now let's dive into another story that will keep you on edge. Sleepwalker and a Witch, 100 Years of Supernatural Family Legend. Story number 2. I recently bought a house, a spacious, 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom duplex. An old farmhouse-style home, complete with a barn in the backyard and a few acres of land. Beyond my property lies nothing but farmland stretching as far as the eye can see. After purchasing the house, I realized the attached unit was in horrible condition, falling apart and looking like something out of a horror movie. If you walk through my backyard and find an opening in what feels like the jungle of my neighbor's property, you'll come across a faint path leading down to their house. This is where things took a darker turn, and I began to regret my decision to buy this place. The entry doors had broken windows and a rotted-out frame, while vines and trees overtook the windows and grew into the ceiling. Inside, it was as if time had frozen around 2010 or earlier. Old flip phones, bulky gray laptops, and huge box TVs sat alongside outdated floral furniture. Everything felt abandoned, left behind. Ceilings had collapsed in several places. The ceiling fans drooped down like wilted flowers, and every cabinet and drawer was still filled with food and dishes, now covered in animal feces. Boxes were chewed open by mice or rats. Moving to the next room, I found 3 doorways. One to the basement, one to the hallway leading upstairs, and one to the living room. What I found in the living room was shocking. Piled high to the ceiling were bottles and bottles of Johnson's baby lotion, alongside stacks of old porn VHS tapes and DVDs. The room was cluttered with food containers, empty drink cans, bottles, and jugs, making it feel even more disturbing. The hallway wasn't much better. It was overrun by an entire colony of spiders and webs, so thick they seemed almost cartoonish. Just walking through it made me feel itchy, as if the spiders were crawling all over me, even after I left. Then there was the basement. This is where things went from bad to terrifying. The entire basement was lined with cages, small ones for rodents and larger ones for cats and dogs. They were filled with shred paper, old food, and water. There were no animals or carcasses, but there were easily 10 to 15 cages of varying sizes. A couple of dog crates were even found in the living room. As I made my way upstairs, the staircase was lined with gallon jugs of water, all the way to the top. Once I reached the second floor, I found several bedrooms, each as disturbing as the next. The first room I entered was an oddly long closet. Nothing particularly unusual there. However, the next room seemed like it had once been a child's bedroom. It had multicolored fan blades and kitty wallpaper, but it was no child's room anymore. On the bed were 4 cardboard boxes, kind used for raising baby chicks. They were still filled with bedding, water, and food, and disconnected heat lamps had been placed inside the boxes. A dresser in the room held an old TV and a DVD player, along with more stacks of pornography and bottles of baby lotion. But it was the next bedroom that horrified me the most. From the doorway, I could see leaves and vines creeping into the room. Sunlight poured through a massive hole in the roof, filling the air with a rancid smell. The roof had collapsed onto the bed, and underneath the hole was a tarp covering a large 55-gallon drum. It seemed as though someone had been living there, despite the damage. The rest of the house was scattered with old milk jugs and iced tea containers, likely filled with water collected from the hole in the ceiling. What do I do? Who do I call? Can anyone help me? I love my home, but I feel so overwhelmed with a feeling of regret. Why wouldn't my inspector have notified me of this? How could the sellers not tell me about the horrors next door? Where is the man who owned the home? After speaking to the township, I found that he's still alive, paying his mortgage and taxes. The man has multiple warrants out for him for code violations and snow removal tickets. Police can't find him. Private investigators can't find him. Nobody knows who he is or where he is. I have collected some small bits of evidence, as his name, his old company, the name of the woman who lived in the house and died in the house in 2015. I found old family photos and an EMT notice posted on the refrigerator. Should I just leave it alone? Should I keep digging? Are any of the porno DVDs any good? Let me know what y'all think, please. I could take any advice at the moment. With that story behind us, here comes another tale that will keep you on edge. Roots. I didn't get much sleep that night. I sat up, my mind racing with endless questions. What could it all mean? Where was his body? Would he still be alive? Was this some terrible joke? And where was Angela? If it was murder, why the noose? The thoughts swirled in my head, loud and unrelenting. Little did I know, some of these questions would soon be answered. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had been run over. No one had contacted me about work, but I decided to go in, just in case someone was expecting me. When I arrived, I tried the front door, but it was locked. I headed to the back and used my key to get in. I set my bag on the break room table and quietly walked around the office, going room by room. I didn't hear or see anyone. Something felt wrong. Air was thick and heavy, and the entire place seemed different. I told myself it was probably just the aftermath of last night's events. When I reached Dr. Lance's office, I slowly opened the door. I half expected to see him sitting there with a smile, asking about my weekend. If I hadn't been so frightened of him after Friday, I might have even wished to confide in him about his own disappearance. But the office was as empty as I had expected. As I scanned the room, something caught my eye on the corner of his desk. I stepped closer for a better look, and my brain struggled to make sense of the grisly sight in front of me. It was a canine tooth crossed under a lateral with a molar perched on top. The roots of the molar wrapped around the single-rooted teeth, acting as a sort of clamp. They were still bloody, the blood looking dried, but not completely, still holding on to its red hue. I stared at it, unsure of what to do. I decided to run to the nearest operatory to put on gloves. Grabbing a sterile pouch from the lab, I carefully placed the strange tooth formation inside. I examined it for a few moments before sliding it into my pocket. I searched the room for any other signs of something unusual, but nothing else seemed out of place. The only thing missing was the small vial of teeth Dr. Lance had been staring at before he lashed out at me. I wondered if it meant anything, but decided to bring the evidence to the police and give them any information they might need. As I turned to leave the room, I nearly collided with Angela, who was standing silently behind me. I screamed, jumping out of my skin. Once I realized who it was, I bent over, trying to catch my breath. Jesus, Angela, you scared me half to death. I didn't think you'd be coming to work today. I waited for a response, but she stared blankly at the corner of the desk. Angela, are you all right? I asked, growing concerned. What were you doing in here? She asked, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. My face grew pale. Not this again, I thought. This strange energy was getting out of hand, and I felt like a frightened animal backed into a corner. Nothing. You have no reason to be in here. Get out, she said, her voice lifeless. I completely understood, considering what had just happened to her husband. I nodded and slipped out of the room without protest. As I rushed back to the break room, a shiver ran down my spine. All of this odd behavior was getting to me. So I grabbed my bag and hurried out the back door. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I decided I didn't want to go home just yet. There was so much going through my mind, and I needed to clear my head with a nice long drive. I drove around the familiar streets and back roads of the town for about 45 minutes, lost in thought. Eventually, I decided to drive past the Lance's home. just to see if what Sadie had described was exaggerated or not. I had only visited their white picket-fenced home once before. They had invited me over one Friday to play some board games with their twin niece and nephew. They were about my age, and we actually had a wonderful time. Being fairly antisocial, it was a pleasant surprise to get along so well with a four-person group. The whole family seemed picture-perfect, with their welcoming smiles and a home that smelled like warm coffee and vanilla. As I reminisced, I turned the corner onto their street, and my eyes were immediately drawn to the end of it. Their beautiful home, once a place of love and excitement, was now a sight that would make anyone feel sick. It made me wonder once more how things had gone so wrong so quickly. Crime scene tape covered the closed garage door, the front door, and acted as a fence around the whole yard. It was completely void of life, and the beautiful flowers that once lined the walkway were shriveled and dried. I slowly drove to the end of the street and parked my car in front of the neighbor's house for a moment. My nose began to sting as tears welled up again. A single tear rolled down my cheek. But before I could really cry, I noticed one of the blinds in the upstairs windows being pulled down as if someone was trying to peek out without being seen. My emotions quickly shifted to laser focus. I couldn't make out any person, and for a moment, I thought maybe the blinds were just broken and always looked like that. As soon as the thought crossed my mind, I received a text. I glanced down at my phone and saw, text message, Angela. I didn't open it right away, but looked back up at the window. The blinds were back in their original shape, as if nothing had ever been out of place. My heart stopped, and I sucked in a barely audible gasp before quickly shifting my car back into drive. I didn't want to stick around to see who or what was watching me. I whipped out of that neighborhood like a bat out of hell and decided it was time to go home. As soon as I got home, I sank into the couch and turned on the TV. Angela's text was still waiting on my phone. I let Face ID unlock it so I could see the preview. It read, "Don't be messing with things that you don't." The pit in my stomach deepened. I hadn't even read the whole text, but I felt like I was being threatened by the Italian mafia or something. "Fuck, dude," I said out loud to myself. I was so tired of all this mess. At this point, I felt like begging my previous boss for my job back. I'd gladly take some Gossip Girl drama over whatever this was. I braced myself before opening the full message from Angela. "Don't be messing with things that you don't understand, Amelia. I need you to return what you stole by tomorrow morning. If it isn't returned, bad things will happen. I'm serious." Now I felt that my life was in danger. I contemplated my next actions carefully. Should I respond to her text or just leave it alone and call the police? I was scared. No, I was terrified. I wanted out of this situation and didn't want to deal with whatever messy consequences would inevitably come from all of this. But I knew I didn't have a choice. I decided to do both. Quickly typed back, "You're really scaring me, Angela," and hit send. I decided I would visit the police department first thing tomorrow morning. I'd bring them the odd tooth formation I found and show them the creepy text I received from Angela. I was beginning to think Angela played a big part in whatever happened to Dr. Lance. I got up and made sure all of my doors and windows were locked, just in case I really was in danger. I didn't fully believe Angela's threat, but I didn't want to take any chances either. As I made my way to the kitchen to make myself a light lunch, my phone chimed again. Text message, Angela. This time, I immediately opened it. "This is much bigger than both of us. I'm warning you because I care about you. Do as I say, Amelia, or you will regret it." I nearly dropped my phone. What the hell was she talking about? I decided it was time to turn my phone on Do Not Disturb. This was all too messy and too much for my brain to wrap around. I made myself a PB&J and turned on YouTube. I watched moist critical police chase videos and crocheted until the sun went down. It worked. I managed to wash my brain of the issue that had been haunting me, even if it was only temporary. Around 9:30, I took my dogs out and herded them into their kennels. Most nights, I let them sleep in my bed, but tonight I wanted them to stay in the living room so that if anyone tried to break in, they would alert me. I brought my katana, which normally hung on the wall for decoration, into the bedroom with me. I set it on the floor next to my bed and wrapped myself up in the comforter. Surprisingly, it didn't take long for me to fall asleep, despite my current dilemma. Constant stress must have been wearing on me. It was 3:30 on the dot when my eyes shot open. I didn't hear or feel anything out of the ordinary, so I wasn't sure what had woken me. My eyes drifted to the alarm clock, and I lay still and silent, just to make sure it wasn't an intruder, but my dogs were quiet, which meant I was safe. I let out a deep, sleepy breath and rolled onto my side, ready to drift back to sleep. That's when I heard it, plastic-sounding scrape coming from under the bed. I froze, straining to listen. The floors were real wood, so I thought maybe one of the dog balls was rolling around with a draft, something that happened from time to time. But what I heard next was unmistakably horrifying, an impossibly deep, nearly demonic-sounding breath, like the sound CGI dinosaurs make in movies when they're quietly hunting their prey. My skin turned to ice, and my whole body went rigid. "Amelia, is it?" A deep, whispering voice came from directly beneath me. I couldn't move, let alone respond. I heard it shift slightly, but it didn't sound like a person with rustling clothes. It was more like plastic beads rolling on the floor. Something crawled up the wall and gently placed itself over my forehead. It felt like a snake-like tentacle, covered in hard bumps. I whimpered, paralyzed with fear. I couldn't see anything in the pitch-black room, and the thought of dying at the hands of an unknown creature in my own bed was too much to process. Its voice came again, like the sound of a spinning quarter on a wooden desk. "A woman of great taste." It trailed off as another beady tentacle slithered under my chin. Tears silently rolled down my face, wetting my hair beneath me. I sniffled and grimaced at the disgusting creature holding on to me. "Profession of little desire. But why?" it asked in a menacing tone. The tentacle under my chin slithered its way between my lips, forcing my mouth open. I tried to keep my jaw shut. The creature's strength was unimaginable. I thought my jaw might break if I resisted any longer. The tip of the tentacle probed around inside my mouth, starting on the top right and moving to the back, feeling each and every one of my teeth one by one, right to left, left to right. I trembled uncontrollably, hoping against all hope that this was the most vivid nightmare I had ever had. When it reached the lower right side of my mouth, the tip of the tentacle perched itself on top of my last molar. With one quick tap, I felt the tooth crack, and I screamed in agony. During my 4 years as a dental assistant, I had learned that each tooth has somewhere around 70 nerve endings, and I felt each and every one of them screaming for help. The tentacle flicked upward, running itself from my soft palate, causing me to gag the back of my front teeth. I continued to cry in pain as it caressed my face with the now slobbery tentacle. "Return what is not yours, and you'll never have to see me again. I don't want to turn any more of those pearly whites into a problem." As it spoke its last words, it slowly released me. I heard the beady creature recoil under the bed as the right side of my face throbbed. I needed medical attention or painkillers, but both were far out of reach for the same reason. Couldn't force myself to leave the bed. So I lay there, frozen, staring at the ceiling in silence until the sun came up. At some point, I managed to curl myself into the fetal position, quivering uncontrollably. I probably would have stayed there forever in shock if my dogs hadn't started whining and scratching at their kennels. This was their normal morning behavior, their reminder to Mom to get them breakfast. Slowly, I unfolded myself and sat up, scanning the room for any Cthulhu-like creatures. But of course, everything was in its place. I carefully scooted to the edge of the bed, where the door handle was waiting for me. I reached for the handle, opened the door without taking a step off the bed, took a shaky breath, jumped off the bed, and ran to the living room as if something were on my heels. I looked around and finally accepted that I was safe. I opened the 2 kennels and gladly welcomed the excited kisses from my dogs, their fuzzy bottoms giving me a small rush of serotonin. Once they were taken care of, I grabbed the stupid tooth formation from the counter and made my way to the office once again. I didn't even change out of my sweatpants or my stained PJ shirt. I looked exactly how I felt. I pulled into the office parking lot to find it was empty once more. I unlocked the back door, flung it open, and hustled to Dr. Lance's office. I placed the sterile pouch containing the creepy teeth on the desk and quickly made my way back to the exit. I didn't look around for anything odd or try to gather any more clues. I was done. I never wanted any reason to piss that thing off again. I didn't care if Dr. Lance's body was super glued to the wall. I didn't see anything. I quickly drove to the prompt care clinic a few blocks away and waited for a couple of agonizing hours before I was finally seen. When they brought me back, I explained that I had broken a tooth by biting down on an almond. Lie was stupid, but I couldn't think of anything else. They took an x-ray, and when the doctor came in, he looked peppy, but I wasn't feeling it. "Looks like you had a rough night," he said with a small chuckle and a big white smile. "Yeah," I grumbled, trying not to act like a total jerk. "I was looking over your chart and x-rays. You bit down on an almond?" he asked, as if it were unbelievable. I nodded, wondering why he was questioning my story. I thought it was the most believable I could come up with. "It's just that the tooth cracked in a very unique way. I've never seen a crack quite like this. I'm no dentist, but we do get our fair share of tooth infections and fractures on the weekends." I quickly followed up, "May I see? I work in dental." I was nervous, wondering how badly this thing had messed up my mouth. "Sure thing," he said, pulling up the x-ray software on the monitor in front of us. When he opened the periapical, I was floored. As I mentioned earlier, I've been reading x-rays for about 4 years. I've seen many things that defy what I believe to be standard. Front tooth that broke in half horizontally, a tooth stuck sideways in someone's chin, a grown woman with 7 baby teeth. You name it, it's most likely happened. But when I saw the state of my molar, which had been perfectly healthy just yesterday, it absolutely defied my expectation. The tooth had a large abscess at both root tips, at least 3 large cavities, and the crown had been split into 4 pieces, divided by the roots. Cracks visible in the x-ray were so large that we didn't need a specialist to locate them. "Jesus Christ," I finally managed to say. "My thoughts exactly. But it looks like this tooth has been a silent problem for many years. Let's get you some antibiotics for that abscess, and then you should see your dentist as soon as possible." "Okay, thanks," muttered, unable to take my eyes off the screen. I didn't blame him for thinking this had been an ongoing problem. If I had seen this in someone else, I would have said the same thing. I made an appointment at one of the corporate dental offices in my area to get the tooth extracted. They were able to get me in the same day, so after the appointment, I came home with a numb face and 1 less tooth in my jaw. I asked the doctor to let me keep my tooth so I could examine it when I got home. I held it up in the Ziploc bag and gazed in amazement, thinking about how something so small could cause so much pain. I knew this wasn't the end of my problems, but I decided it was time to start looking for a new job. I hoped never to hear from Angela again. While the rain keeps falling, our next story will bring even more fear. I played poker on the table of death. I decided to go all in with my life. "Come on, Matt, it's going to be fun." Ron insisted on me joining the poker table at the end of a dimly lit alley on our way back from the club. "You've had 1 drink too many, you dumbass." Brushed him aside. "We don't know these people, and it's night, and well, it's a table on the streets. Let's get out of here." "Oh God, you are such a chicken." Ron made a chicken sound while flapping his arms before turning away and walking to join the table. "Ah, fuck it," I say as I give in and follow him to the end of the alley where I see the old half-broken wooden round table. 3 people sat at the table who each held an interestingly creepy look. Ron sat to the left of me. To the left of him sat a man who introduced himself as the prisoner and wore a dirty, worn-out orange shirt. To the left of him sat an old bald lady with broken glasses. She didn't introduce herself, but held a gentle, sweet smile that you would expect your grandma to have. To the left of her sat a slender young man who looked to be around 20 years of age. He told us that his name was Chad. You can believe that. He looked like a nerd who would play poker by using some probability formulas in his head. And well, to the left of him was me. I know, this whole situation feels crazy. Why are we, 2 drunk friends playing poker in an alley with 3 complete weird strangers? I would like to think that it was just Ron's fault for getting me to tag along, but something in the air made me want to play too. The granny, by whom I refer to the old lady, picked up the cards and told us that she would act as a dealer too. However, she momentarily turned her gentle smile into a stern expression and said something that made alarm bells ring in my head. Only one person leaves this table. You chose to sit down and play, so if you attempt to leave now, you will be shot. This is sacred. What the fuck? This is so dumb. I am out of here. I said and got up, but prisoner quickly pulled out a revolver and aimed it at me. Sit down. Granny said while Ron tugged at my shirt to sit back. I did. We all will each have $100. Granny continued. Whoever runs out of money will die. This will continue until one of us takes it all. But why? I asked in an agitated tone that truly reflected how weird I felt, half unsure if this was some sort of weird joke. Why death and all that? Let's just play normal poker? Granny just smiled her warm smile again, but this time it sent shivers down my spine. Chad answered for me. Well, sir, you see that we are performing sort of a ritual, and we were short of 2 people because they did not show up. You will do, he said with a bland expression. You will do. And so began our long session of poker. Hand after hand after hand. Time felt stretched out. Night remained unchanged after hours of our play. We all carefully placed our bets, and people never seemed to raise. By this point, I was sure that this was no joke, and that I cannot afford to lose. Thankfully, people started to lose their patience. I knew I just had to hold it together until the others couldn't. Prisoner was the first to go all in. I folded, of course. But Granny called, and Granny won. And then Granny took the gun, aimed at the prisoner, and with the sweetest smile in the world, she shot him. We continued playing with his corpse still sitting at our table. Chad seemed to calculate all our expressions and probabilities of card. He was going to be hard to beat, or so I thought. Soon enough, Chad and Ron both went all in and showed their cards. Chad had a double ace, while Ron had a 2 and a 3. You ran out of patience, huh? I remarked exhaustedly. Goodbye, Ron. Hope this game was fun for you. Shut up. I'm not gone yet. He replied with a hate clearly noticeable from his voice, and the granny began to show the cards. Ace, 5, king. Chad laughed with excitement, which was unexpected, because I didn't think he was capable of showing emotion. I just let out a sigh and accepted that my friend was going to die. But I didn't feel too bad. He was responsible for all of this after all. Granny pulls out another card, queen, and then she pulls out the last one. 4-4, I won. Ron cried out in excitement, bucking Chad, to hell with you. Chad reverted to his emotionless face and simply stared into nothingness. Granny aimed her gun at Chad and shot again. 2 lifeless bodies on the table now. 2 more to go. We played for what felt like days, making small bets so as to not exhaust our reserve. But then I noticed that Ron was getting antsy again. He was raising a lot now, and while me and Granny folded, I knew he was bluffing to gain small advantages. So, when he raised me, when I had good cards, I doubled. He doubled, and soon we were all in. It's one of us now. I spoke with a broken voice. Even though I blamed him for this, he was still the friend that helped me get through tough times. He helped me when my parents died. He helped me when I was broke. He helped me when I was a complete mess, and never asked anything in return. He didn't reply, just laid out his cards. I laid out mine. Granny did her thing and I won. I hated that win. I hate it now. I will hate it forever. I am sorry, I whispered to him. I looked down and braced for the sound of a gunshot. 3 dead bodies now. I looked at Granny, who still held that sweet, warm smile. Looks like it's just us now. I said exhaustedly, Yes, dear, let us continue. She spoke softly. I shook my head. I am tired of this. Whatever hand I get, I am going all in now. Tell her, I did not care then. My friend just died against me, and I could do nothing. I am in the middle of this weird, crazy game, and the world has somehow stopped. I wanted to be gone, dead or alive. I understand, she said and dealt the last hand. She went all in too. We both revealed our cards. She got a king and a queen. I got a king and a queen, but I had them in the same suit. Granny pulled out the cards, and in no time it was evident that I had won with a royal flush. What a way to end this sad, pathetic game. I looked at Granny, and she looked at me. She nodded and put the gun to her chin and pulled the trigger. Table full of dead people, and meaved. I lived. I thank God that I got to walk away that day, and hate him for allowing such a game to be played in the first place. I have stopped playing poker for obvious reasons. To be honest, I have stopped living too. That day killed the desire to live within me. I am thankful to be alive, but no longer know what to do with my life. I write this down in hope that this helps me get over it a little. Deep down, I know it's of no use. If that last story scared you, this next one will take the fear even further. A Reddit confession. I watched a woman drown. This is a post taken from Ask Reddit. What's a secret you've never told anyone? Throwaway Biscuit 123 posted, I watched a woman drown and did nothing. I know that makes me basically a murderer and definitely a coward. Well, karma got me. A few weeks ago, I ended up in the ER for severe dehydration. I nearly died. I didn't run a marathon, wasn't trapped in the desert. I was sitting on my front porch. My neighbor was the one who found me. I wish he hadn't. How did I get here in the first place? It all started 3 months ago. I'm half Korean on my father's side. He died from lung cancer right before his 60th birthday, and shortly after my 30th. After his funeral, I decided I would explore my roots. So I took a lone trip to Korea. I didn't speak a single word of Korean, but I had a translator on my phone. Plus, a lot of people know English. I figured I was all good. Right? Wrong. It was a lonely trip, and turns out not knowing the language was a lot harder to navigate than I thought. On my last night, I was eating bulgogi at a restaurant alone. My eyes were watering. It was way too spicy, even though I asked for no spice. Few girls who looked around my age giggled and watched as I tried to finish my meal. I coughed and downed a glass of soju. One of the girls came over and teased. Too spicy? I wiped my mouth with a napkin and smiled, glad to hear that she spoke English. Her name was Hana. One thing led to another, and I found myself at a house party with Hana and her friends. Over a dozen people squished in a tiny apartment in Seoul. They spoke in Korean most of the time. I couldn't keep up with my translator, so I just sat and nodded, pretending to understand. Hana gave me a pill. Make you happy, not lonely and sad. She insisted. Bucket. I swallowed the pill down with my beer. She was right. That shit made me happy. Suddenly, I felt like I could understand every word that was being said. We laughed and drank and partied all night long. Then at some point, ghost stories came up. Some guy warned me about Molgwishin, water ghost, and the vibe shifted. This guy seemed serious. Everyone suddenly seemed serious. In Korean folklore, Molgwishin are spirits of people who've drowned, and now they're trapped in the water. They cry out for help, acting like they're drowning, and when you go in to help them, they pull you under, drowning you, and you take their place. Molgwishin, you better watch out. His face was stone. No one said anything. I thought maybe someone would laugh, but no one ever did. The night was over. Hana said she'd walk me home. We walked alongside the Han River. There were lights reflected on the water from the Banpo Bridge, which is known for having this awesome rainbow fountain. Look it up. Beautiful. It was super quiet. Not a lot of people out, which was surprising. Sure, it was 2 in the morning, but I guess I just expected more people. About a block from my hotel, Anna said she had to pee really bad and dipped into a 24/7 mart. I waited outside, and that's when I heard it. Something near the river. It sounded like someone yelling. I went to look. I was shocked to see a woman screaming and thrashing in the river. She was drowning, and all I did was stand there and watch, frozen. It all happened so fast, too fast for me to do anything. That's what I told myself again and again. But deep down, I know that's a lie. I could have helped, but I was too scared. Too scared of Molgwishin. The woman struggled a while longer, then disappeared under the water. Why didn't I yell for help? I ask myself that question all the time. I don't have an answer. Her body floated to the surface. And still, I just stood and stared. Then a voice yelled out. It was Hana. She ran past me into the water and pulled the woman out. She tried to save her, but it was too late. I'll never forget what that woman looked like. Her mouth was hanging open and her eyes were wide, and I don't know, she seemed horrified and disappointed. She was looking right at me. I left Korea in a panic. Never saw or spoke to Hana again. I didn't look up any news articles or anything like that about the drowning. I didn't want to know about the victim. I wanted it all to go away, but it didn't. One day I was on my lunch break, sitting in the park, when I heard a sound coming from the fountain. It sounded like someone crying out for help. My blood ran cold. I went to the fountain, and no one was there. I figured I must be losing my mind. Nothing some drugs couldn't fix, right? My doctor put me on 10 milligrams of Lexapro. She said we'd start with 10, then go to 20 if I needed it. Well, the 10 didn't help, and neither did the 20, and neither did anything else. I started to hear that woman's cries every time I took a shower, coming from the drain, so I stopped taking showers and baths. I got fired from work when co-workers started complaining about the smell. Whenever I turned on the faucet, I heard her cries again. I couldn't drink a glass of water without hearing her, so I started buying bottled water. But then, when I opened the bottles, I could hear her down inside the bottle. When it rained, it was the worst. During a storm, the wind sounded like her howls. The rain beating against the windows sounded like her arms smacking the water. Wherever there was water, she was there crying out for help. Then she was there in all liquid, milk, juice, all of it. When I opened a can of soda, it hissed and sounded exactly like the air leaving her lungs that night. I stopped drinking altogether. No water, no liquids, nothing, ever. In the ER, they gave me an IV. I could hear her in the bag. I ripped the IV out of my arm and ran. Now I'm back home. I can't take it anymore. Can't go on like this. So this is the last thing I'll ever write. My confession. I wrote it before I grabbed the knife. I'm sitting here now, waiting to die. Slit my wrists wide open. I swear I can hear her in my blood. Update, I'm alive. I don't know how or why. I'm back at the hospital, and it's storming outside. Just when you thought it was safe, the next story will send another chill down your spine. I am being watched. I haven't been comfortable for a while, which is ironic. I fled the cities to live remotely near Gustavus, Alaska. My goal was peaceful serenity, something I couldn't find in a crowd full of people. It drew me away from civilization into the stillness of the forest, where I had the same soundscape as another individual living 500 years prior. Now I am stuck here, and I long for those people I left. They were familiar, and at least I could imagine their intentions were similar to that of my own. It started a few months ago, prior to the completion of my cabin. I went out one afternoon to finish hammering the shingles on my roof. There was plenty to do before it got cold, so I was working rather tirelessly, which is possibly why I didn't notice the noises. It wasn't until I took a break that I heard the sound of another hammer off in the distance. Its sound was concerning. My mind dreaded the idea of a neighbor, but I was curious, so I followed the audible trail. I walked for what felt like ages, but its volume remained consistent, and there was no indication of my proximity. Curious, I thought to myself, and I retired my interest in whoever was nearby, turning back the way I came and keeping a steady pace so I wasn't stuck out there when night fell. The oddity of the darkness coming quickly didn't cross my thoughts, but now that I think back, I can't recall how long I was out there searching for that sourceless sound. On my way home, I had the strange sensation of being watched, and I hurried along because I feared there could be a large animal stalking my path. I wish now that it was an animal. My quick strides ceased as I heard the rustle of something in the tree directly above my stance. I slowly directed my gaze upwards so I could try to identify the creature contributing to the adrenaline surge in my veins. It was then that all the noise in that forest culminated and then stopped altogether. It was as though they all collectively feared the presence of whatever resided above. Not even the mosquitoes would buzz, and it was harrowing to think there was something in existence that would elicit such a response from every single entity near it. All animals have their life-threatening beasts, but even a butterfly would still land on the nose of a lion. I thought it'd be best to mimic an ignorantly calm behavior. Maybe it would abandon a prizeless slaughter if I didn't give in to its clearly craved fear tactic. What's a hunt without a chase? I controlled my breath, ensuring it was steady and relaxed while my mind proceeded to be anything but. I could feel a monitoring spirit, almost submitted to my desire to flee helplessly. But my idea seemed successful because the lively sounds returned, and I was able to continue back. Odd. When having the ability, that creature didn't pounce, which begs the question of its intention. Fear I felt within those moments ate up my mind to the point where I don't even remember the latter half of my walk home. I was relieved when I came upon the warm glow of my cabin, but being within the safety of my house didn't resolve anything. I still felt precarious. I was, however, grateful for the life I kept, and I was able to sleep, not peacefully, but at least with a somewhat sound mind. The weeks between that encounter and the next, I would spend spiraling, but it wasn't caused by the occurrence in the woods. No, it all fell to shambles when I awoke the next morning. The day was absent of saturation, and even the sun's penetrative rays appeared dull and lifeless. It was the first time I had a disdain for being alone. When my head turned to find the window, a piercing pain went through my body as the two met. My window was old and had damage from the sun and rain, so it wasn't clearly visible. Through it all, I was able to make out a long branch-like hand, slightly discolored, to match the subfusc ambient. My body froze, and the cryptic hand moved its fingers in a way that made it seem like it was waving? What an oxymoronic act. As I said earlier, there wouldn't be another true occurrence for a while, or at least that's what I have to tell myself. I believe I have driven myself mad over all this, and constantly being on edge will affect your sense of reality. Fight my plummeting mental state. I knew I needed some type of interaction, so I took my truck into town and excused it as being a trip to collect more supplies for a storage shed I was putting together. The town seemed emptier than usual. I know the individuals who reside here have similar motives to my own regarding lifestyle, but it truly felt like a ghost town. Pulling into the wood supply shop, I noticed the barrenness of the parking lot, and I couldn't help but feel worse about my situation. At this point, any human face would do. I went inside the store thinking surely there were people who worked there, but to my dismay, there was still no one. The store felt cold and almost dry, being lit by iridescent lights, an absence of life, devoid of color. I got what I needed and went to purchase my supplies, but no one was at that tattered checkout counter. So I called out, "Hello?" But the echo of my call was empty. There was no hope behind it. I knew I was alone, so I left cash on the counter and headed back to my car. I fumbled in my pocket for my keys, and as I did so, I got that old feeling again, feeling I first had in the wood. I heard a faint voice cry, "Hello?" It sounded like my own. I had no intention of discovering its source this time, and I rushed my stride towards my car. I heard it again and could distinguish the distortions where it was trying to match my tone. I tried to remain calm, but my heart was leaping out of my chest. I jammed my keys into the lock and opened my truck, practically throwing myself into the driver's seat, locking my doors and starting it up. I put it in gear and was about to take off when, well, that's when I saw it. I think describing it would be overwhelming, but I am going to do it because, at this point, I already know my fate. I am sitting alone in my cabin, trying to type this out for you, and I can already hear the knocks at my front door. Anyway, I saw it standing on the sidewalk outside the store. It had no expression on its face. It was long and wiry, and the face it possessed was human-like, uncanny. It had pale, discolored skin, and behind the eyes, there was nothing. The hair it had was long, patchy, and wet-looking. It faced me, but I couldn't tell if it was looking at me. The body was twisted in a manner so strange it reaffirmed my suspicion of it not being entirely human. I really didn't know what it was, but it knew me and was clearly after me. So why hadn't it ended the chase? What was the motive? Why me? Where is everyone? The built-up fear was eating me alive as I knew my end would come soon, but I still had no idea of when. I know one typically plays with their dinner when it is plentiful, so it makes me wonder about the others in town. I drove back home, and it let me. I'm guessing I am one of the last ones, and I have come to a conclusion that I think explains everything. The thing, whatever it may be, has been stalking the town for months. It hasn't been on my case because I am a rare occurrence in that vicinity, but after the town went down in numbers, it ventured further. I know of its capability to mimic in order to lure you in. Since I live alone, it merely echoes me. It has had plenty to feast on, but as the days go on, it will eventually hunger once more. I have thought of leaving, but the day after I got back from town, a blizzard came in, trapping me in my cabin. So here I am, sitting at my computer, waiting. The knocks only get more demanding, and I'll eventually have to let it in. I long for those people I left. With the last story still fresh in your mind, it's time for another eerie tale. Hunting Dave, Part 1, Supernatural Experiment, 6th Test Subject. Dave, DNA Unnatural 17, codename Jadak. I looked down at the paper and then looked up. In front of me was a man named Dave who had volunteered for the experiment. It was my first time conducting an experiment. After all, the experiments were only conducted by high-ranking employees, which I was now thanks to my promotion. "Are you feeling all right?" I asked him using the mic. "Yeah, thanks for asking," he said quietly. He seemed nervous. "Is this your first time taking part in an experiment? You seem really nervous," I asked. "Yes, I'm a bit nervous because they made me sign an agreement before this stating that they won't be responsible in case of injury or death," he replied. "Oh, don't worry about that thing. It's just a formality they have to do before conducting experiments. You'll be fine," I assured him. "Thank you. I feel a little better now," he replied. "Shall we get started with the experiment then?" I asked. He nodded. I pushed the button on the panel and one of the walls opened up. A box came out of the wall. "Please take the contents out of the box," I instructed him. Dave opened the box and took a small vial with red liquid and a syringe out of it. "Take the syringe and inject yourself with that liquid," I instructed. He took the syringe and filled it up with the liquid, then proceeded to inject himself with it. "How do you feel?" I asked him. "I don't really feel that good," replied. Before I could say something else, Dave suddenly started screaming. "Ah, it burns, he screamed. Dave's skin started melting away. In less than a minute, all his skin melted away, and only flesh could be seen. "My jaw, it hurts," he screamed in agony. His mouth started opening wide open, with teeth all around it. He tried to close it with his arms, but the teeth sliced through his arms like butter. I quickly pressed the emergency button to get reinforcements in. Suddenly, his eyeballs fell to the ground and a huge hole formed in his chest. I watched as the hole was slowly filled by a red eye forming inside it. Suddenly, a bunch of armed men came rushing in. They quickly grabbed me and started getting me outside. "No, we need to save him," I screamed at them. "The only one we need to save is ourselves from that thing." They screamed back. I watched while getting dragged away, Dave screaming in absolute agony and pain. "No, no, no, no." I suddenly woke up completely drenched in sweat. Seems like I was dreaming. "Nightmare?" asked a familiar voice. I looked, and it was Tracy. Just some bad memories from the past. We were discussing about UDA and then what's going on?" I asked. "Jason poisoned you and drove off with the pen drive. That's what," he replied. "Seriously, where is he now?" I asked. "I don't know. Probably with the UNF," he replied. "What are we waiting for then? Let's go find him." "We need to get that pen drive," I exclaimed. "We have bigger issues at hand right now," Tracy said as he turned on the TV. "Breaking news. Monster on rampage. People are advised to stay at home and avoid going outside. Seems like we do have a much bigger problem to deal with. Hunting Dave, Part 2. Supernatural, Part 1. So what now?" Daniela asked me. "Well, we have to stop that thing, Dave now," I replied. "We? There's no way I'm fighting that thing," she replied back. "I guess then I will have to," I said as I turned off the TV. "Do you at least have a plan to deal with it? Let me at least tell you its weak points," she said to me while getting up, but almost falling to the floor. "Take it easy. You got poisoned not too long ago," I said as I grabbed a chair for her to sit on. She sat on the chair, still being weakened by the poison. "As for the weak points, it's the eye and the chest and head, isn't it?" I asked her. "How did you?" "The egg died by getting stabbed in the eye, and the head is a weak point for most creatures. It's not that hard to figure out." I interrupted her. "Seems like there's not much I can help with after all, huh?" she said in a gloomy tone. "That's not true. Maybe you can look around the house for a clue to where Jason is. I found a bike in the garage with few cans of gas, so I'll be using that to get to Dave," I said as I headed for the door. "Aren't you forgetting something?" Daniela said as she grabbed the phone on the table and tossed it towards me. "I already have one. You keep this one. My number is on there, so call me if you find anything," I said as I tossed it back to her. I got on the bike and started riding towards the place where I last saw Dave using the GPS on my phone. There was a slight nice breeze, kind you would want while riding a bike. The road was bumpy at times, but it was fun. I was enjoying the ride. After all, who knew what was coming next? 4 hours later, I was about 20 minutes away from the place when I noticed a weird smell, the smell of blood. Suddenly I was tackled by something. I fell off my bike and hit a tree. I looked up and there it was, Dave. It started walking towards me. It got closer and closer and closer. Then I suddenly realized something was wrong. That thing was about half the size of Dave. Was it perhaps an offspring? But how did it grow so fast? Lots of questions, but no time to think because it's coming right at me. It suddenly dashed at me. I dodged, but it hit my right arm. It was smaller than Dave, but also much faster due to its size. My right arm was bleeding. I held it with my left arm. Then suddenly the symbols on my left arm started glowing red, and the wound on my right arm was healed. Not in the normal way, the blood had frozen, stopping the bleeding. Then it dashed at me again, but this time I got on my legs and jumped over it. While I'm in the air, I turned my left arm into an axe and cut the creature in half vertically. I defeated the creature, but I had no time to relax. I heard a grrr sound behind me. Quickly looked back. Seems like Dave wasn't the type to be satisfied by one offspring. Hunting Dave, I saw 3 more of those creatures waiting for me after I turned around. These ones were the same size as the one before. I suppose their abilities must be similar as well. I took a few steps back to gain some distance from them, but 2 of them started getting closer while one waited behind them. I went back until I was out of the road and near the trees. The creatures were looking at me with their eye in the chest, even though their face with crimson hollow eye sockets also faced my direction. Suddenly one of them screamed, and both of them in the front dashed towards me. I enlarged my arm and grabbed a tree, then swinged it as hard as I could. I hit 2 of them. The one standing on the back was out of my range. The 2 who got hit were now just a pile of red flesh and blood. The last one standing towards the back finally spoke. "Release me. Kill me. Help me." I froze in shock. This one still had its human conscience, or so I thought. It suddenly smiled and leapt at me. It had gotten my guard down. It was halfway to me in the air when it was hit by a car. The car didn't stop and kept going. I was able to make out a mark that I recognized on it, a red U. Those UNF guys also want to visit Dave, huh? I thought. I went to get my motorcycle, but it stopped working. It must be damaged from the attack. Seemed like I had to go on foot. I followed the road for 5 minutes. Then I noticed something on one of the trees. It was an egg, much bigger than the one at the facility. Seems like the outside was somehow accelerating the maturing of the eggs. No wonder so many of these creatures were out there. I turned my left arm into a blade and stabbed the egg's eye. It screamed and then it died. Suddenly my phone rang. It was my other phone calling, which was with Daniela. "Hello?" I said as I picked up. "Hey, I found some stuff here that you might want to know about." Daniela replied, "Make it fast. I'm in a hurry right now." I said, "Okay." So I found some chats on Jason's computer. It had a password, so it took a little bit of time, but I managed to get in. Seems Jason was already talking to some guy from the UNF. Daniela explained. "Spare the details and get to the point already," I interrupted her. "Gosh, okay. They were talking about how you got your powers. It seems they wish to use the same ritual or whatever you use to get powerful." Daniela replied, "There does seems to UNF guys after Dave. Do you think they might be trying to get Dave's powers?" I asked. "Maybe. We don't know who from UNF it was. What Dude 7306 doesn't really give much of a hint. Either way, be careful." Daniela replied, "I will. You too." I replied and hung up. I started following the road again and came across the car with the red U. It was smashed into a tree. They either crashed due to a creature or terrible driving skill. Either way, the car was empty. Seems like they decided to go on foot as well. I started running. Can't let them get to Dave first. Hunting Dave Part 4. I kept running, but the road was covered in darkness. All street lights were destroyed, making anything far away barely visible. I did not know how far I was or how long it would take to find Dave. Suddenly there was a scream, but it wasn't from my front. I looked to the right. That's where the scream came from. I noticed footprints on the soil, about 3 of them. The UNF guys must have gone that way. I started sprinting away from the road towards the trees. It was a forest. A lot of trees were in the way. You could hear the sound of insects, branches breaking and leaves crunching with every step. The only light there was the moon's light. I kept running with only the moon as my guide. I finally saw some broken trees. Dave must be around here, I thought. I started walking, following the path made by the broken trees. They weren't just plucked out of the soil. It was like a huge hammer went through them at the same time. "Stop right there," the voice said. I looked to my left where the voice came from. There was a figure standing there. It was now getting closer. "Put your hands up or I'll blow your brains out," it said. As the figure got closer, I realized it was a man holding a pistol. I put my hands up. "I volunteered to stand guard because I didn't think anyone would come here, but here you are," he said. Seems like he didn't know who I was. I could use that to my advantage. "Well, who are you guys and what do you want?" I asked. "Why the hell should I tell you?" he replied, now pointing the gun to my head. "Consider it a dead man's last wish," I replied. "Well, can't dishonor that," he said as he took a step back. "We are the unnatural fanatics. We worship unnatural and the OU. My boss seems to be here to tame that monster or whatever that is. She calls it an unnatural human, the perfect creature. The thing seemed to go that way, so she went after it," he said as he pointed towards the path of broken trees. "Any other last words?" he said as he took a step closer. "Well, thanks, and sorry about that," I said as I punched him on his stomach using my left arm. He went flying backwards by the force of my punch and crashed into a tree. He didn't die, but did go unconscious. I again started walking towards the direction of the broken trees. Suddenly, there was a scream from the direction which Dave went towards. I started running towards it. Finally saw Dave, but I wasn't exactly happy. Dave had impaled a man using one of his now 6 arms. There was a hole in the man through which blood pouring out. His eyes were dripping red, which met the river of blood flowing from his mouth. His intestines were visible as they hung from the hole in his body. I noticed a woman standing in front of Dave at a closer distance than me. It took some adjusting of my eyes to clearly see her. But when I did, I realized who she was. It was Brittany Raltz, the missing girl whose investigation dragged me into this mess. The worst part about this was that she seemed excited seeing that man get impaled. "Oh, magnificent. You have exceeded my expectations. You're so much better than I thought. I want you. I will have you," she said. She took out a knife and cut off her arm. "No way. She was doing the ritual." "Don't do it," I yelled at her. She threw her severed arm in the air, completely ignoring me. "Custodi me et esto mi custos. Hic contractus manebit donic unus ex nobis periet," she chanted loudly. "There's no turning back now." Supernatural Dave looked at Brittany's severed arm and started walking towards it. He got closer and closer, then walked right past it. He was now walking towards Brittany. "Wait, why didn't it work?" "I did exactly what that damn book said," Brittany said. You could hear the fear in her voice. Her legs were trembling. It was clear that she was realizing the situation she was in after her plan failed. Dave now got closer to her. He was right in front of her. He raised 2 of its arms up. Brittany just stood there frozen from fear. Dave brought down his 2 arms in full force to crush her. I barely made it in time to tackle her out of Dave's way, but the shockwave from his smash still created a blast which made us hit a tree. I looked at Brittany. She finally had control over her body again, possibly due to the pain from hitting the tree. She suddenly looked at me and asked, "How did the fucking ritual work for you but not for me?" I just stared at her with disbelief. She almost just died and all she cares about is the ritual? Are you gonna say something or what? She yelled at me. I don't know. Maybe because the ritual works on unnaturals and Dave is not a fucking unnatural? I snapped back at her. She flinched a bit. She wasn't expecting me to yell back. Dave suddenly growled, looking at us but not making a move. "You're a UNF member, right? Do you have something to fight it? Maybe like a weapon or a pet unnatural?" I said to Brittany. No. I came here to make Dave into my pet unnatural. I have no other way to fight it," she replied. Seriously, these kids are so fucking dumb. She seriously came here without any way to fight him? Well, just stay back and don't get in my way then, I said to her. I looked towards Dave. He was just standing there, waiting for me to make a move. Honestly, I have no idea how to win this one. That guy already overpowered me when he had 4 arms, but now he had 6. Not to mention, I have to protect this kid behind me. I was sweating. I knew that this fight might be my last one. Honestly, I wanted to run away, but there's no way I can leave Brittany behind and let Dave be on the loose. I charged towards Dave. I made my left arm into a long rapier and went straight for the eye in its chest. I was about to hit it when Dave covered the eye with 4 of his arms. My rapier was not able to go through. I jumped back. Suddenly, 4 of Dave's arms detached from the side of its body. The 4 arms merged into his chest, creating a meat shield around the eye. Dave knew that I knew his weak spot and covered it. The good news is that now I only have to deal with 2 of his arms. So I went for his second weak spot, the head. I turned my arm into a scythe and jumped up into the air to slash his head off. I suddenly got a quick flashback, and just like last time, Dave grabbed my leg and threw me into a tree. I have to stop making such simple moves, especially when they've been countered before. I tried getting up, but the damage was quite a bit. It would take me a few minutes before I could get up again. Dave ignored me and went towards Brittany. She again froze in fear. Dave grabbed her and pulled her close to his head. He opened her mouth forcefully and then opened his mouth. He put his open mouth on her open mouth, and you could barely see some kind of red goo flowing from his mouth into her. He was trying to turn her into one of his eggs. I watched. I couldn't get up yet. My arm was bleeding due to the impact. All I could do was watch. What is it that you wish to do? I wish to protect her, I said. Lies. What is it that you truly wish to do? I want to fucking kill Dave, I said. Raise your arm. I held up my left arm. Direct it towards your target. I pointed it towards Dave. Imagine raw power in your palm. I imagined what I felt was raw power in my palm. Suddenly, the symbols on my arm started glowing red. The blood from my bleeding arm started flowing into my palm. Compress it into a projectile. I imagined it to become a small ball. The blood compressed into a small ball, very dense. Shoot what? I said. Shoot. I imagined it to shoot. The symbol on the backside of my palm that wasn't glowing before started glowing. The ball shot out of my hand like a bullet, piercing right through Dave's back into the eye. Dave let out a final scream before falling down, losing his grip on Brittany. Dave's flesh started melting away, only leave a deformed human dead body behind. I went over to check on Brittany. She was unconscious, but her arm had mysteriously grown back. I carried her body to the car that I had seen before. I started turning on the car. It took a few attempts, but it started. Now I'm driving back to Daniela. Hopefully she has found something useful. Even if she hasn't, we'll get the information out of Brittany. As the storm outside grows stronger, so does the terror in our next story. John didn't respond. It started as a joke, as many things do. John sent a text to his friend James one lazy afternoon. Guess what? I'm in Japan. James, being familiar with his humor, responded with a simple, "Sure you are." The two exchanged jokes, with John sending a blurry image of Mount Fuji that looked like it was pulled off the internet. James laughed it off, knowing full well that John was sitting in his cramped apartment a few blocks away. For the next few days, the Japan joke became a running gag between them. Every time John would text, it would be something similar. Just tried sushi in Tokyo. Or, these vending machines are wild. James played along, sometimes responding with mock skepticism, sometimes indulging the joke, pretending to be jealous of his friend's imaginary trip. A week later, James casually asked John to hang out. He hadn't seen his friend in days, and he missed their usual routine of grabbing a drink or playing video games. John replied, "Can't. I'm still in Japan." James rolled his eyes and texted back, "Yeah, sure. Seriously, though, let's hang out." "I'm serious, man. I told you I'm in Japan for real now." James chuckled and called John out. Sent him a photoshopped picture of John standing awkwardly in front of Shibuya Crossing. Pixelated edges and mismatched lighting. "Come on, John, you can do better than this," James typed, laughing at the absurdity of the fake photo. But then, things got weird. Later that evening, John sent a video. It was a first-person view of someone walking through the neon-lit streets of Tokyo. John's voice narrated the scene, pointing out landmarks, commenting on the bustling nightlife, and even saying he had learned a few Japanese phrases. The footage looked legit, and the way John narrated it made it feel like he was really there. For the first time, James hesitated. Was John actually in Japan? Still, something felt off. The voiceover seemed slightly delayed, and some of the phrases John used sounded out of place. But James, not wanting to admit he'd been fooled, texted back, "Wow, okay, guess you're really there. Weird flex, but all right." John didn't respond. Days passed, and John's silence became unsettling. James tried texting him again, calling, but there was no reply. Worried, James decided to drop by John's apartment. Maybe it was all just part of the joke, and John was hiding out, ready to reveal the punchline. When James arrived at John's building, he knocked on the door but got no response. The lights were off inside. He twisted the handle, unlocked. Inside, the apartment was dark and eerily quiet. As James stepped in, he called out, "John?" No answer. He wandered through the apartment until he reached the living room, and there, sitting on the couch, was John. His back was turned, his figure perfectly still. "Man, you had me going," James chuckled, walking over. "All right, let's end this joke now. Where have you been?" As James approached, something felt wrong. John wasn't moving, not even shifting his body slightly in acknowledgement. James reached out and touched his shoulder. That's when the figure fell forward, collapsing onto the floor with a hollow thud. It wasn't John. It was a life-sized cardboard cutout. James staggered back, his heart pounding. Cold sweat washed over him as he stared at the lifelike cutout of his friend. What the hell was going on? Frantic, he ran through the apartment, searching for any sign of John. The place was empty, abandoned. It was as if John had never lived there. He grabbed his phone and called John again, his hands shaking. The call went straight to voicemail. James's mind began to spiral. He scrolled through his phone, looking for pictures of them together. There were none. Photos that once showed them hanging out, laughing at parties, or at concerts had vanished from his gallery. In their place, there were blanks or pictures of James alone. Confused and terrified, he called up mutual friends. Each time, the response was the same. "Who's John? I don't remember meeting anyone by that name." "Are you feeling okay, James?" It wasn't possible. John had been his best friend for years. They grew up together, shared memories, didn't they? But now, no one seemed to remember John, and the more James insisted, the more people questioned his sanity. His phone buzzed. Message from John. "Are you sure I ever existed, James?" James dropped the phone. His thoughts raced, a flood of fragmented memories and distorted reality. Had John ever been real? Was this all some sick joke? He started to wonder if his mind was unraveling, if he was slipping into some nightmarish delusion. The gaslighting continued. John, or whatever was posing as John, kept sending cryptic messages, planting seeds of doubt. James found himself losing track of time, questioning every memory, every experience they had shared. He isolated himself, consumed by paranoia. Friends who once knew John now avoided James entirely, whispering behind his back, as though he had lost his mind. One night, driven to the brink, James returned to John's apartment for the last time. The door was still unlocked, cardboard cutouts still lying on the floor. James sat down in the empty living room, staring at the walls, his thoughts swirling in a void of confusion. He opened his phone, scrolling through old conversations, trying to piece together some proof that John had existed. But there was nothing. No photos, no texts, no videos. Only the echo of John's voice in his mind, mocking him. "Are you sure I ever existed?" James couldn't take it anymore. The weight of doubt, the crushing loneliness, the feeling of being trapped in a reality that didn't make sense. It was too much. He stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the city below, the lights blurring as tears filled his eyes. The world outside felt distant, unreal, just like John. The only way to escape the nightmare was to end it. And so James stepped forward into the void. Later, when the police arrived, they found no traces of John, no indication that anyone had ever lived in that apartment. To them, James was just a troubled man who had lost touch with reality. Tragedy. Nothing more. But in the back of James' phone, in a hidden folder, a message lay unopened. "Goodbye, James. It's better this way." But little did they know, the true nightmare was just beginning. How can I get some rest? When I get sleep-deprived, auditory hallucinations are the first indicator that I really need to get some rest. I first noticed it when I was about 7 or 8 years old, when me and my friends would compete to see who could stay up the longest. I would start to hear more in the room than just the group of obnoxious kids in the room and the blaring speakers powered by the Xbox. When my body hits that wall, that numb feeling of my senses being submerged underwater, every part of my mind and body drooping heavily, that's when the sounds begin. They start simple. Knock at the door, footsteps matching my pace just around the corner. Within a few hours, I start to hear the voices. It was never anything more than a hello over my shoulder, or even my name being called out from a distance. It's gotten bad once before, during finals week my sophomore year of college. I had to stay up studying and finishing projects, all while working evenings as a prep cook at a small market on campus. I'm not sure how long I was up, but I had been hearing voices for days. Got to the point where the line between sleep deprivation and reality began to blur. I normally could distinguish between the hallucinations and those around me, voices in my head sounding slightly muted, almost compressed. This time, however, they got loud and clear, and I couldn't tell if I heard something in my mind or my ear. While dicing some chicken, I nearly had a conversation with myself, responding to a, "Hello, Mark," and a, "How are you?" My manager saw me react to nothing and came over, noting the fatigue in my face and the slouch in my shoulders. He told me he'd take over, and I should use the evening to get some sleep. I went home, ignoring the pitter-patter of footsteps following me on my walk, and fell asleep immediately. Something similar is happening again. The voices have come back, but this time it's different. I'm suffering from a wave of insomnia. It's been years since I had exams or deadlines or grades to worry about, so I'm not sure what's causing it. I've tried melatonin, I've stopped drinking caffeine, and yet despite feeling like a bag of bricks, I just can't get any sleep. I think I've been awake for at least a week and a half, but I'm not totally sure. I'm still going to work, maintaining the front desk at an ER, and I'm still going about my day normally. I almost don't even feel tired anymore. When the voices started, they were normal. I walk past an open door and hear a beckoning, "Hey, hey," from the darkness. I tell a leaving patient to have a good night and hear, "You too, Mark," from behind me. I head off for lunch and hear those feet dragging behind me. I understand these are normal symptoms of sleep deprivation. I'm sure some of you have experienced it to some degree. But a couple of days ago, something changed. The lines completely blurred. I can only be for sure that what I'm hearing is a hallucination if I am completely alone in a quiet room. They've started to become so real, not just in perception, but in feeling. Simple phrases have become whole sentences as well. "Where are you going? Can I come with?" when I'd leave for work. "I know you're busy, but I need you to take a look at something over here." From the dark, empty linen closet across the hall from my desk. I chose to ignore it all. I don't want to get caught looking crazy in public, so I don't respond to anything unless I see a person speaking the words. But yesterday, I lost it. I was cooking myself dinner, and from the living room, I heard a loud sniff and then, "Fix me up a plate too while you're at it." "Shut the fuck up and leave me alone," escaped me before I could think. A desperate plea for quiet. Somehow, it did in fact leave me alone for roughly 8 hours or so. The silence was deafening. I didn't realize just how accustomed I had become to the noise. I took advantage of this peace, despite feeling uneasy, and thought I might try and finally shut myself down. That's when I heard quiet giggles from the bathroom. I'd never heard anything like that before, and I ran to make sure nobody was in my apartment. My heart was racing, my face burning, as I rounded the corner and swung myself into the bathroom and towards the light switch. It stopped abruptly as soon as I stepped over the threshold, and the door slammed behind me. Did my shirt catch the handle? Did I slip and knock the door with my foot? Was there a strong draft in here? "You know it was me," rang in my ears, filling my skull and forcing me to the ground. I closed my eyes for a second, focusing on nothing and trying to clear my brain. I stood up, straightened myself, not submitting to my crazy imagination. I round up some courage and walked back to my bedroom. Since then, the voices have altered. They're less frequent, but are mostly these mind-numbing shrieks. It sounds like someone is screaming right into my ear. I can almost feel their lips pressing against me, their spit hitting my neck. They are mostly quick. Some have lasted a whole minute, filling my head and making me feel hollow. A couple times I've heard a loud bang in the other room, and have walked in to see a book or plate fallen off a table. Did I put it too close to the edge? About an hour ago, I decided I have to keep trying to sleep. It's the only way out. Finally, I started to drift away, happy to know that this was coming to an end. Just as I was about to release my annoying companions, I felt something grip my arm, sending me upright in bed. Did I bang it on the nightstand? I've been known to twitch a bit when falling asleep. There's a deep purple bruise on my forearm now. I'm not really sure what's going on, but I think this overwhelming sleep deprivation is causing me to go insane. Is there anything I can do to finally get some sleep, or at least get rid of the foul noise in my head? The silence between breaths grew heavier, and then something moved in the shadows. Professor, my life was at an all-time low when these events took place. I was in deep depression, and my father had recently passed away. Dad had always been my caring parent. He always made time to talk when I had a pressing matter and needed his advice. He was always upbeat, offering practical advice and encouraged me. My mother, on the other hand, never had a good thing to say and would belittle me whenever she had the chance. Later in my life, I came to realize she was probably jealous of me. I was an honors student attending a well-known university at the time. It took a great deal of effort to continue my studies and not drop out. I didn't have any really close friends. The program I had enrolled was extremely challenging and took up all my time. While other students were able to enjoy a social life, I simply didn't have the time. It was the end of my junior semester when I took a required course that my troubles began. I had been warned about the professor, but didn't really have a choice in the matter. It became obvious during his second lecture that this professor enjoyed making his students' lives miserable. He told us he didn't think any of us had what it took to be successful, but he would do his best to enlighten us. He loved to give pop quizzes every week. On top of that, his lectures and homework didn't help prepare for his impossible exams. He spoke quickly during lectures, a piece of chalk in one hand, an eraser in the other, as he quickly scribbled one long equation after another on the big chalkboard. We were also required to memorize hundreds of formulas. When he was handing out our graded midterms, I saw that I had received a very middling score, but at least hadn't failed. I was extremely worried how this class could adversely affect my scholarship, as I was required to maintain a high grade point at. I took the exam home and that evening looked it over. Quickly, I grew frustrated, realizing many of my answers had been incorrectly graded. The next day, I went to see the professor so I could bring this to his attention. I waited outside his office for over an hour. He was quite late to return and glowered at me as he headed towards me. "What do you want?" he asked briskly as he unlocked the door to his office. I explained to him my work on the exam had been incorrectly graded. By my calculations, I should have scored a high grade. He sat down and rolled his eyes at me. Then he invited me to sit down and explain that a graduate student had graded the midterm. He listened in silence as I went through the problems and even laughed a couple of times. If I had only known a graduate student had graded my exam, I could have avoided this meeting. Professor took my exam and put it away inside his wooden desk. He looked at me for quite a while, not saying anything. Felt extremely awkward as I sat there. Finally, he said he'd speak to the graduate student. I thanked him as I stood up and got ready to leave. Just as I was stepping out, the professor asked me if I was interested in doing some work for extra credit. Without hesitating, I said yes. Then he told me I could come to his home the following evening at a specific time and gave me his address. I didn't think about it that much right at the moment, but over the course of the evening, I realized that maybe what the professor had asked was inappropriate. I went to bed and did not sleep well. The next morning, when I woke up, I felt quite anxious. I really didn't like how he had been looking at me while I plead my case regarding the midterm. Felt like he was looking up and down my body over and over as he sat there in utter silence. I didn't eat much that day, nor had much of an appetite. I attended my classes and had a hard time concentrating. Many times I caught myself obsessing over having to meet the professor again. Finally, it came time to go. I got my backpack and climbed on my bike. At least the weather was nice as I rode my way into the elite neighborhood. My professor lived in a large two-story house located at the back of a long cul-de-sac. I parked my bicycle beside an expensive-looking sports coupe and then walked up the driveway to the front door. I had to ring the doorbell several times, then finally I heard the door unlock to be greeted by my professor. He led me into his living room and asked me to have a seat on a big leather couch. I smelled alcohol on his breath, although he didn't act, was drunk. He sat down across from me on another couch. "I'm glad you could make it," he said and grinned. "So I've had some time to look over your midterm. I'm aware you're one of our honor students. That said, are you aware it's hard for women to succeed in highly technical roles?" He sat there with his big grin. Immediately I informed him I had a Xeroxed copy of my midterm and had spoken to the graduate student that graded the midterms. Suddenly he stopped grinning. "Well, good for you," finally replied after a long, awkward moment. He then told me my grade would be corrected, and I left. That moment felt so good. I ended up passing the course with the highest grade in the class, and slowly my depression lifted by the end of the semester. Unfortunately, that's not the end of this story. I ended up enrolling in summer school so I'd have a chance to graduate early. Summer is a time when there are few people on campus in the college town. Over the course of the first summer session, I began to notice seeing the professor. I always kept my distance and avoided speaking with him. I should mention he was quite a big man and really stuck out in a crowd. He had a big round belly and huge muscled arms. Every time I spotted him, I caught him looking straight at me, and he was always frowning. One evening, while I was passing through the small downtown area on my way home after leaving the library, I sensed someone was following me. I stopped at an intersection, waiting for a car to pass by, and looked back behind me. There he was, the professor, only a few feet back, but now he had that evil grin of his again. Immediately, I ran to a nearby coffee shop and went inside. The shop was empty except for one worker standing behind the till. I ordered a hot tea and sat down at a small table close to the counter. In came the professor. He sat down close to the door, watching me the whole time. The server brought me my tea and then informed me she had to step out for a few minutes as she hurried out. The professor laughed as soon as she left, then a Miles Davis song started playing on the speakers. The door opened again as another man entered the coffee shop. He looked at me, but he had a kind, reassuring look. "I need to speak to you right now." I heard him tell the professor. The professor broke his hard gaze as he looked up. "Right now," said the man, grabbing him by the arm. There was a brief scuffle as he pulled the professor up and marched him outside. I remained seated and listened. I could hear a commotion just past the closed door. I heard the professor yell, but couldn't make out what he said. Several minutes passed, then the man stepped back into the shop. I could see he had a fresh bruise on his face, but he looked quite calm. Again, he looked my way with that kind smile. "Can't bother you anymore now," he said, then left. I finished my tea, then got up and left as well. I never saw the professor again and was able to graduate that fall. I was never able to find out who that man was, but affectionately call him Mr. Bill whenever I tell this story. And here the past, something is wrong. The gramophone was found in the Crockett graveyard in a small town in Mississippi. The man watching over it on his nightly guard heard what sounded to be talking 6 feet under. So what did he do? He dug, and he dug deep. Buried in the coffin of an unmarked grave lied the old machine churning out voices of the past, never ending. As the record spun, old voices from decades ago could be heard from even afar. The man, being from a small town, hardly bargained against the $5,000 the U.S. government offered for the fine. It was set up in a museum in Washington, D.C., and people flew in from all 50 states and more countries than you could name in less than 30 seconds. Teddy Roosevelt giving a speech. Gandhi talking about how India would be free. Marilyn Monroe talking classy. Adolf Hitler giving a jarring speech. Sounds of the far past before voices were recorded, Vikings, knights, old languages, all were heard on the gramophone. Well, after 2 years of tourism, the magic began to wear off, and the government, it didn't like that. No, sir, it didn't. Their genius idea? Spin the record backwards and see what it plays. Well, the grand reopening didn't really go as expected. The hundreds of rich and famous tourists were shocked to their core as the record played out not the past but the future. Many cheered as people not even born yet talked about jetpacks, flying cars, people living twice as long, the world being a much better place. 2 weeks of excitement for the future built up and up and up, until the silence hit. Complete and utter silence. People waited weeks, months, even years for the sound to return. No matter what the world's scientists and engineers tried to do, they just couldn't get it to play. For once in humanity's lifetime, it was no longer excited for the future. It was terrified for a lack of. But what they discovered next, no one was prepared for. Who walks among them? It's 8:57 a.m. The store's large fluorescent lights buzz into action. I wear my practiced smile. Perfect. The doors slide open, and the old woman in the faded pink cardigan shuffles in. Her eyes are cloudy as she reaches for the tomato soup, like always. Predictable. I wonder how it feels to fade away like that, piece by piece. Would she even notice if I followed her home? She wouldn't fight back, that's for sure. Good morning, I say, a little too chipper perhaps. She nods, and I'm already forgotten. The store fills with people. They think they're just running errands and living their normal lives. They don't see how easily everything could end. A man rushes past, tie crooked, eyes glazed. He grabs Fruity Loops, going through the motions for a kid he probably doesn't care about. I could break into his house tonight, slip in quietly. What would his face look like when he woke up bound to the bed, unable to move? They're all empty inside. I glide through the aisles, straightening boxes, watching them. This store is mine. I know every creak, every corner, every customer. It's my job to watch them. Near the produce, she's there again, blonde, 17, snapping gum while scrolling through her phone. She doesn't even look up. I could take her right now, shove her into the back freezer. Would she even have time to scream? She walks past, oblivious. They all are. I know where she lives. I could wait outside, follow her home. Snap her neck, though predictable. So easy. I pass the meat section, the scent of raw blood in the air. My fingers twitch. I imagine dragging someone into the back, their blood streaking the floor, hanging them from one of the meat. I'd love to see the life drain from their eyes. Slow, methodical, peeling away their layers. Peeling. The clock ticks closer to 4 p.m. I make my way to the front of the store. At the checkout, a young mother fumbles with her wallet. Her toddler is wailing, thrashing in the cart. She's overwhelmed, desperate for it to stop. I could help her. Take her shopping, carry it to her car, then take them both. So easy. I'd like to see how long it takes for her to beg for mercy, for herself or for her child. I'd enjoy that. She finally leaves, dragging the kid behind her. I watch them go. My heart races. No, not today. I catch my reflection in the freezer door. Calm, composed, just another normal face. But behind the mask, well, I like that no one sees it. I have control this way. 5 p.m. Time to clock out. I take one last look at people who think they know what normal looks like. They have no idea who walks among them. Yet, behind every closed door, another unspeakable horror lurked, waiting. I still remember that night like it was yesterday. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip. Just a group of us, out in the woods, around a fire. You know how those things go. Laughs, stories, drinks. Nothing out of the ordinary. At least, not at first. We'd picked a spot deep in the woods, away from everything. It was meant to be peaceful, to get away from the hustle and grind of everyday life. The trees around us were tall, casting long shadows as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The world felt calm. Too calm, maybe, in hindsight. I was sitting by the fire, the flames flickering and crackling in front of me, with my friends scattered around. We were all talking, laughing about the dumb things we'd done back in college. I remember feeling that warmth from the fire, the slight chill of the evening creeping in, and thinking how perfect it all was. And then, started. Just a small sound at first, barely noticeable if you weren't paying attention. A snap, like a twig breaking underfoot, somewhere in the trees. I glanced up, instinctively, but no one else seemed to hear it. So I shrugged it off. Just the forest doing its thing, right? But that wasn't the last sound. No, the next one was different. This time it wasn't just a snap. A low hum, distant at first, barely audible. But it was there. I remember feeling a tingle in the back of my neck, like something was off. I looked around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. But the woods were so dense, so dark beyond the reach of our campfire. It was impossible to tell. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to seem paranoid, and besides, my friends seemed fine. They were still laughing, completely unaware of the creeping unease building inside me. But I couldn't shake it. That hum, low, unnatural, was getting louder. Then I heard it again. Not just a hum this time, but a strange rustling. It wasn't like the usual sound of wind in the trees. No, this was more deliberate, like something was moving out there, just beyond the edge of the firelight, lurking in the shadows. I remember looking over at my friend, Jake. He was mid-sentence, telling some dumb joke, but then he stopped. His eyes darted toward the woods, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of concern on his face. He'd heard it too. "Did you guys hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely cutting through the quiet that had suddenly fallen over our camp. The others stopped talking, their smiles fading as they realized something wasn't right. Crackling of the fire was the only sound now, loud and out of place in the otherwise dead silence of the forest. Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, I heard it." We all sat there, frozen, listening, waiting. Another sound, closer this time. A snap, definitely a branch. And then nothing, just an eerie, unnatural silence. The kind that makes your skin crawl, that sets your heart pounding in your chest, even though nothing's happening, yet. "Maybe it's just an animal," Thera said, though I could hear the doubt in her voice. She didn't believe it any more than I did. "No," I said, shaking my head. "That's not an animal. Something's out there." We sat there, huddled close to the fire, our eyes darting into the darkness beyond the trees. Every shadow looked like it was moving, every rustle of the leaves sounded like footsteps. The woods had gone silent, too silent. I felt it in my gut. That deep, primal fear that tells you something is wrong, something bad is going to happen. And then, the scream. It came out of nowhere, piercing through the night like a knife. A long, drawn-out scream, echoing from somewhere deep in the woods. It didn't sound human. Didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard either. It was otherworldly. My heart felt like it stopped for a moment. I saw the blood drain from Sarah's face, her eyes wide with terror. Jake jumped to his feet, his flashlight flicking on as he tried to shine it into the trees. "What the hell was that?" he shouted, his voice shaking. None of us had an answer. We were all too stunned, too scared to speak. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin, my mind racing. That scream, it wasn't right. It wasn't normal, and it wasn't far away. "We need to leave," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Jake was already moving, packing up his gear, his hands trembling. "Yeah, we need to get out of here, now." But as we scrambled to our feet, something changed. The woods, there was a shift. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like the forest was closing in on us. The air felt thick, heavy, like we were being watched. Every breath was harder to take, every movement slower, as though the trees themselves were holding us back. We grabbed our flashlights, but the beams only pierced so far into the dense woods. Beyond that, it was just blackness, an oppressive, inescapable blackness. We started to walk. No, we started to run. I could hear Sarah's footsteps behind me, her breathing quick and panicked. Jake was ahead of us, his flashlight bouncing wildly as we tore through the undergrowth, not caring where we were going, just trying to get away. But the woods, they weren't letting us go. That hum, the one I'd heard earlier, came back. Louder now. Surrounding us. Felt like it was coming from all directions, vibrating through the ground, through the trees, through me. I felt disoriented, like the forest was shifting around us, changing. No matter which direction we ran, it all looked the same. The trees were twisting, the path was gone, and the sound, it was growing, swallowing everything. It was as if the woods were alive, and they didn't want us to leave. Jake stopped suddenly, turning to face us. His eyes were wild with fear, breath ragged. "I don't know where we are," he said, his voice barely audible over the rising hum. I can't find the way back." I looked around, my flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the twisted trees. Everything was wrong. The forest, it didn't look the same as before. It felt alien. "We have to keep moving," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "We can't stay here." But as we started to move again, the hum reached a crescendo. And then in an instant, it stopped. Silence. Complete, deafening silence. I turned, looking at Jake, at Sarah. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with terror. The air felt thick, oppressive, like the very forest was pressing down on us. We were trapped, and we knew it. Then, out of the silence, a voice, a whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. It came from the trees, from the darkness all around us. "Come closer." I froze, my blood turning to ice. That voice, it wasn't human, it wasn't right. And then I saw it. Just beyond the reach of my flashlight, in the shadows between the trees, something moved. Something tall, too tall. It was watching us. "Run," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. We didn't need to be told twice. We ran, faster than before, our legs burning, our hearts pounding in our chests. But no matter how fast we ran, it felt like we weren't moving. The woods were endless, stretching out before us, twisting and turning, leading us deeper into the darkness. And then I tripped. But the terror doesn't end there. Our next tale takes us even deeper into the darkness. Corpsewood Manor. We should have never gone down that old unmarked country road. I knew it, deep down. As soon as Tyler's old Chevy skidded off the asphalt onto the gravel, the headlights slicing through the dense blackness of the Chattahoochee National Forest. The road was more of a narrow, forgotten trail, just a strip of dirt, barely wide enough for the truck. Trees loomed in on both sides, their branches like twisted claws scratching at the truck's paint. Jenna clutched my arm from her spot in between Tyler and me on the bench seat, her face a tight mask of unease. "It'll be fun," Tyler said, his voice too loud in the oppressive silence, trying to shake off the nervous tension in the cab. "Just some harmless exploring." I could hear Melissa and Craig's typical sibling banter in the back. They were ready to turn this creepy night into some stupid Instagram adventure. But me? I just felt uneasy nerves, maybe. But the lizard part of my brain was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. After what felt like an eternity, Tyler killed the engine. The silence was instant and absolute, save for the gentle rustle of leaves in the cold night breeze. Dead Horse Road had led us to a small clearing, and beyond that, the barely there trail winding deeper into the forest. Somewhere out there, 3 miles or so, lay Corpsewood Manor. We got out, flashlights flicking on, beams cutting through the fog that clung low to the ground. The night seemed thicker here, the dark more oppressive. Tyler led the way, like he always did. Craig and Melissa followed, stumbling over roots and rocks, laughing a little too loudly. Jenna squeezed my hand, her grip tight, as if she could feel it too, the way the air seemed to hum with something our brains couldn't or wouldn't identify. Tyler's voice cut through the heavy silence, almost eager to break the tension. "All right, so Corpsewood Manor. You all know the basics, right? Back in the 70s, this place was built by Dr. Charles Scudder and his partner, Joseph Odom. Scudder was a professor of pharmacology in Chicago, but he left all that behind to move out here, away from society." Jenna glanced up at me, already looking uneasy. I could feel her pulse quickening against my arm, but Tyler wasn't about to let up. "Thing is, Scudder wasn't just some eccentric professor," Tyler continued. "He had a serious interest in the occult, rumored to be into Satanism too. Built this place as a kind of retreat, or maybe a shrine. They say the manor was filled with books on alchemy, ritual magic, and all kinds of weird stuff. The dude even painted his own murals, demons, pentagrams, that sort of thing. And they weren't just for show. He believed in this stuff, big time." Jenna shivered beside me, her grip tightening. "I heard they used to have parties out here," she said softly, more to herself than anyone. "Weird parties." Tyler nodded, leaning into the story. "Yeah, exactly. Scudder and Odom didn't exactly keep to themselves. They'd invite people over, friends, drifters, anyone really. They called it their pink room. No electricity, no running water, just candlelight and booze. Scudder made his own homemade LSD so people would get high, talk philosophy, or whatever else they did. There were rumors of rituals, some weird sex stuff, and sacrifices. Animal sacrifices mostly, but who knows, right?" Craig snorted. "So like typical hippie cult stuff?" Tyler's expression darkened. "Maybe, but it went deeper than that. Scudder called himself a follower of Thelema, which was this occult philosophy started by Aleister Crowley, the great beast. Scudder also kept a small altar in the manor, with a skull, candles, and that statue of Mephistopheles, the same statue that went missing after the murders. Finally, after what felt like hours of trudging through the endless dark, the trees began to thin, and we saw it. Crumbling silhouette against the moonlit sky. Corpsewood Manor. or what was left of it. The ruins stood like skeletal fingers clawing up from the earth, half swallowed by ivy and tangled in moss, their jagged edges sharp against the night. Broken brick walls leaned precariously, and shards of shattered glass glinted in our flashlight beams. A once stately place, now left to rot and ruin. Jenna stopped, her breath catching in her throat. This is it. Her voice was a strained whisper, as if speaking too loudly might awaken something lurking in the dark. Yeah, Tyler replied, his voice low and almost reverent. This is it. We crept forward, our steps slow and tentative. Every movement felt heavy, deliberate, like the earth itself resisted our intrusion. The air seemed thicker here, colder, each breath a shiver. The shadows felt alive, pressing in from all sides. We stepped over what remained of a crumbling threshold, crossing into the gutted remains of the manor. Inside, the ground was littered with broken bottles, remnants of past visitors who'd come seeking a thrill and left behind their trash. A rusted can crunched under my foot, and I flinched at the sound, too loud in the stillness. Look at this, Melissa whispered, pointing to a broken wine bottle with a faded, torn label. People really came out here to party? Tyler's flashlight swept across the ground, revealing more. Old cigarette butts, scraps of cloth, a discarded lighter. Yeah, he muttered. Particularly fucked up, considering Joseph Odom's ashes were spread here. His light paused over a dark stain on the brick floor. Something that might have been oil or something else. Melissa stopped in her tracks and spun on her heel, face pale and strained in the dim light. What the hell, Tyler? You didn't think to mention that before we came out here? That his ashes were spread here? Her voice rose, frantic and edged with anger. Are you kidding me? This isn't some haunted house attraction. This is a real place where people died, where their bodies were literally scattered. Melissa, calm down, Tyler said, tone steady. Plenty of people have come here and left without anything happening. It's just a story, just a place. We'll be fine. Look around. People partied here, trashed the place, and went home with no problem. Nothing's gonna happen to us. Melissa's eyes narrowed to slits, her rage barely contained as she practically strangled Tyler with her gaze. The tension between them crackled in the cold air. Tyler, unfazed, continued his unsettling lecture about Corpsewood Manor. Back in the early 80s, people around here started getting nervous, Tyler began, voice dropping to a whisper as he continued. Rumors spread that Scudder, the owner, was a Satanist. And in December 1982, things went straight to hell. Two guys, Tony West and Avery Brock, who'd been out to the manor a few times, decided to rob the place. They were drunk, high, whatever. Things went south fast. They shot both Scudder and Odom, killed their dogs, Beelzebub and Arsenath, all while Scudder's collection of human skulls stared them in the face. A moment of silence followed, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves. Jenna turned to Tyler with a puzzled frown. Wait, you said Avery Brock? You have the same last name as one of the murderers? That's creepy. Tyler's lips curled into a smirk. Even better, he's my uncle. Jenna's eyes widened, and a chill ran down my spine. That's pretty fucked up, man, I said, trying to hide my unease. Jenna nodded, her face pale. Yeah, why would you be proud of something so horrible? Melissa's eyes flashed with anger. You goddamned asshole! You brought us to the place where your uncle murdered people. Her voice rose sharply, cutting through the night. This isn't some casual adventure. It's so fucked up that you drag us here knowing the history. Tyler's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. It's just history. Not my fault what my uncle did. Melissa's face twisted. You've been boasting about your own shitty family history like it's something to be proud of. That's messed up. Fucking sick. Tyler's expression darkened, his tone growing colder. Yeah? Well, at least I'm not known around here for being a raging slut. Before he could finish, Craig stepped forward, his face set in a protective glare. I will fucking end you, boy. Back up off my sister. Tyler's hostility flared, and the argument grew more heated. Sensing the danger, I stepped in quickly, trying to defuse the situation. Look, this isn't helping anyone. Let's just leave before things get any worse. This is seriously messed up. You should have told us about this before dragging us into a fucked up field trip. Tyler's jaw tightened. He said nothing. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken fears and the weight of the night's revelations, as we gathered ourselves and prepared to leave. The wind shifted, growing colder and whispering through the brick ruins like a sinister hiss. Tyler's face grew momentarily serious. "You ever hear of Faust?" he asked. But before Tyler could continue, Craig and I exchanged uneasy glances. "Tyler, just stop," I said, trying to cut him off. "You're really pushing it, motherfucker." Craig started, his voice edged with increasing frustration before Melissa silenced him with a firm look. Tyler ignored us, his tone growing more intense. Scudder was obsessed with Faust. The legend says he sold his soul to the devil for knowledge. Who knows what kind of deals Scudder might have made out here in these woods? "Tyler, seriously, stop talking," I urged again, but his words persisted, carrying an unsettling weight through the dark forest. Jenna moved closer to me, her fingers brushing mine. "Why does it feel like we're being watched?" I didn't have an answer. The whole place felt wrong, like the ruins were breathing, watching, waiting. The silence was so complete, it felt like a living, palpable thing pressing against my skin. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of the atmosphere, the darkness more solid than air. We continued to explore, pushing deeper into the ruins, our flashlight beams slicing through the murk. A broken, rotting wooden staircase loomed to our right, leading to a second floor that had long since collapsed. We found what remained of the pink room, now just a shell of its former self. Bare walls still bearing faint, faded murals of demons and sigils. Tyler moved ahead, pushing through a tangle of ivy, when Jenna stopped suddenly. "Did you hear that?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. I listened, straining against the silence. Faint noise, just on the edge of hearing. A low, rumbling growl like distant thunder, but it came from the shadows, close, too close. Then another growl, answering from the opposite direction. Deeper, more menacing. The sound vibrated through the floor, through my bones. Jenna's grip on my arm tightened painfully. What was that? Her voice trembled, panic creeping in. I swung my flashlight toward the sound. For a moment, I saw nothing but shadows. Then they emerged, slowly from opposite sides of the clearing. Two shapes, massive and dark, moving through the gloom with a predatory grace. They were more shadow than flesh, their forms barely visible in the dim light. Their eyes, though, those were unmistakable. They glowed like hot coals, a dull, reddish light burning in the depths of the night. Beelzebub and Arsena, Scudder's dogs, the guardians of Corpsewood, still patrolling their territory even in death. "Run!" Tyler's shout was almost drowned out by the sudden, explosive barking, a sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath us. Greg panicked, turning to sprint, but he took 2 frantic steps before his foot slipped on a patch of moss. He tumbled backward down a small, steep embankment, disappearing into what had once been a pond, now a dry, rocky basin filled with detritus. His body landed with a sickening crunch, the sound of bone against stone echoing in the night. I heard his scream, sharp and shrill, reverberating through the ruins. The dogs moved like shadows given form, silent and impossibly fast. One bounded down the slope with terrifying agility, landing with a heavy thud. Craig tried to scramble away, but his leg was twisted beneath him. His movements frantic, desperate. His hands clawed at the earth, fingers scraping against something cold and hard. The broken remains of a pink stone gargoyle, half buried in the mud. He was pinned, helpless. The mastiffs pounced, their massive jaws closing around him. Craig's screams filled the night, a sound that turned my blood to ice. I felt Jenna's fingers digging into my arm, her breath quick and shallow, on the verge of hyperventilation. I grabbed her, pulling her away, toward the remnants of what must have been a parlor, when I saw him, Charles Scudder, or the thing that had once been him. He stepped out of the shadows, his face a ruin of flesh, eyes milky and unseeing, yet somehow fixed on us with an unnatural rage. His clothes hung in tatters, filthy with dirt and mold. In his mummified hand he clutched something, a tarnished heavy statue, glinting dully in the moonlight. The missing statue of Mephistopheles. Tyler stood frozen, his eyes locked onto the corpse of Scudder, a mixture of fear and acceptance flickering across his face. The dead figure raised the statue high, a grotesque reminder of Avery Brock's sins. As Scudder's dead eyes bore into him, Tyler sank slowly to his knees, his expression a haunting blend of resignation and dread. The statue, gripped with unnatural strength, hovered above him, casting a long shadow as if preparing to deliver the ultimate retribution for the sins of his uncle. The forest held its breath, the weight of inevitability pressing down on Tyler as he awaited his grim fate. The crack echoed through the woods before I even saw it. Tyler's skull splitting open under the crushing weight. Blood erupted, dark and glistening, spraying across the ruined walls and dripping in dark rivulets. But Scudder didn't stop. Its hands, wet with blood, rose and fell with mechanical precision, the statue smashing down again and again. Tyler's body twitched and jerked with each brutal impact, his flesh tearing, bones shattering under the relentless assault. The wet, sickening thuds filled the air, punctuated by the crunch of splintering bone and the soft, gurgling sounds from what remained of Tyler's ruined head. The corpse kept beating as if driven by a fury that death couldn't quell. Melissa's scream cut through the night, a sharp, keening wail that sent a shiver down my spine. She turned to flee, but the forest had already closed in, trail swallowed by an impenetrable darkness. We were trapped, the air thick with a palpable, sinister energy. The shadows around us began to stir, creeping closer with an unsettling purpose. Suddenly, foliage sprang to life. Vines lashed out like serpents, wrapping around Melissa's ankles and yanking her off her feet. She clawed desperately at the ground, but the possessed plants were relentless, dragging her inch by inch toward the ruins of the old coop. Her screams grew frantic, then choked as the vines tightened around her throat, pulling her deeper into the darkness. Melissa's cries grew faint, lost in the dense, suffocating dark. With a terrible finality, I knew we had lost her. Jenna's grip on my arm was like a vice, her face drained of color, her eyes wide with a terror that seemed to pierce through me. We turned and ran until our throats were raw and the muscles in our legs screamed for relief, until we burst out of the forest and straight to the truck. We escaped. Physically, Jenna didn't quite make it out. What she saw in those last moments fractured her mind. She stopped sleeping, her eyes darting around like she could still see the shadows moving, creeping ever closer. She'd mutter to herself in the dark, nonsense words mixed with prayers, her fingers scratching at her arms until they bled. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink, just sat rocking back and forth, whispering about vines crawling up her legs, about Melissa's face emerging from the shadows, about a voice that kept calling her name in a low, mournful wail. The doctors tried everything, but nothing could reach her. She shrieked if anyone touched her, her hands clawing at empty air like she was fighting something only she could see. It wasn't long before they sent her to a mental health facility, her mind shattered, broken, by that night, corpsewood. And now I sit here, my hands trembling, trying to make sense of it all, trying to put this nightmare into words. I don't know how much time I have left. Arsenoth and Beelzebub have been circling the house for 2 days, their black forms pacing just beyond the windows. I can feel their gaze through the walls, feel their presence thickening the air. They're waiting for me. Subscribe for more stories.